Okay, we're good. So, seeing the presence of a quorum, we're going to call this meeting of the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:42. Whatever. I wonder if he can call me back.
Do you want us to proceed?
Yeah.
Okay. And seeing the presence of a quorum for Union 26, I call the meeting to order at 6:43 PM.
Okay, and I guess I'm going to try calling him back. I'm not going to be that rude. The first, I guess I should wait till I get him on the phone because I'm going to read it out and then do a. We're running a little late.
No problem.
That's good. How are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Nice to see you in the audience. Thanks for being here.
Disrupt your flow, which apparently I did today, so I apologize.
I was teasing Kara earlier about sitting like as far back as she could. Peter, you there?
Nope, it's voicemail.
Okay, he's dead, so, I mean, he's, line is dead. Can I just start over again? Just please. I'm glad this is all on
You want me
camera.
to
Hi,
hold on
everyone.
to your phone and see if it goes
No, it's okay. I mean, so the first order of business is approval of the minutes of October 24th, 2017. Have people had a chance to take a look at the minutes? Hopefully you're doing so now if you haven't. It's in order to accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved?
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, and this is obviously for the regional committee. All those in favor of approving the minutes of October 24th, 2017, please signify by raising your hand. They're approved unanimously.
And then, sorry, kind of spaced out there for a second. So for Union 26, I will accept a motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, October 24th.
So moved.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you.
Okay, now, for the regional school committee, I am offering a motion to move into executive session in accordance with open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, pursuant to Purpose 2, to conduct strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, in this case, Michael Morris. If the chair so declares the need to do so, and I'm so declaring. Is there a second for the motion?
Seconded.
Okay. No discussion? Okay, moving to a vote, I'll take a roll call vote, beginning with Mr. Medina.
Married, aye. Do you want me to cage aye?
Nakajima, aye.
Ordona's aye.
Hazard, aye.
Okay, so the regional committee is going to withdraw an executive session, and
And for Union 26, the intent to call to order and enter executive session in accordance with open meeting law, MGL, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, pursuant to Purpose 2, to conduct strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, Michael Morris, and also be advised that we will not be returning to open session after the end of executive session. And I will take a roll call vote.
Do we need a second?
Or second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Castonson, aye.
Hazard, aye.
Ordona's aye.
Married, aye.
Thank you. We are now in executive session.
okay. Calling back to order the meeting of the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee at 7:26 p.m. The first order of business is announcements and public comments. Public has 3 minutes for a comment if they so desire. They address the microphone and address the committee. Seeing none, we'll move to committee announcements. Ms. Hazard.
I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that there is an Amherst School Committee meeting immediately following this. It's scheduled for 9 o'clock for 10 minutes.
Are there other announcements? Yes.
I just wanted to update the committee very quickly on the conference, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees conference. Literally just like 10 seconds to say that I went last week. It was a great conference. It was my first, and learned a lot of really great things. And I've already shared with our chair and with the superintendent some things that I would like to bring to the committee at some point when the agendas allow. Because I think it might be really helpful. So just wanted to share that.
Yes, Mr. Donnelly?
Was there, I don't know if there was a joint meeting of SETF and the school committee?
There was.
Just recently that I was
Yes.
unable to attend. I didn't know if anybody would be willing to give a brief synopsis
Well,
of
we
the
have
events
actually, under
thereof.
subcommittee updates, we have actually SETF.
I thought that's where we were, subcommittee updates.
No, we're on announcements.
I'm sorry. Request retracted.
No, it was quite prescient. No further announcements, as I expected. Moving on to subcommittee updates. Amherst Media Liaison. And obviously, if no one has a comment, they don't have to make one, but I'm just literally gonna call them out.
Sure. So, Amherst Media has embarked on a capital campaign to raise, about 350,000 or around there, 350,000. That's the estimated cost to build a new home for Amherst Media, which we located on Main Street, across from
Spoiling
Burnham's.
a beautiful lawn. I know that.
So, there's no real choice to stay in the current facility right now. Eversource, 7 years ago, told Amherst Media, you gotta find a new home. And so, so that's the opportunity there on Main Street. And so folks can get involved with that. And then the Rotary Club is having their, which is a major funder for Amherst Media. They're doing their annual auction, so folks can get interested in that as well. So that's the update on Amherst Media.
Yes.
I know the superintendent has done his own productions there as well, so that could come at maybe, at his discretion, so.
Sure. I mean, I'll just say briefly in the spirit of time, Amherst Media has been wonderful to work with. They're continuing to support us with Window into ARPS. Last week, the CPAC episode was kind of edited and ready, and this week I believe we'll have the PGO. We had three elementary, we put out to everyone, but three elementary PGO leaders came and talked about what they do and the critical work they play. So we're deeply appreciative of the continued work they offer us.
Wonderful. We don't have anything on that subcommittee. Budget subcommittee.
Sure. We met tonight with officials from town of Amherst, town of Pelham, and a couple of, I guess,
Bicycle.
members of the, no, the
Regional assessment?
maintenance staff. And we went over the 10-year capital plan. And basically, it was an opportunity for members of the towns to provide feedback and input.
Leverett was there too.
Were they there?
Yeah.
Great. Leverett was there. Excellent.
Okay. Very succinct. That's good. No. It's
Yeah.
it's
We're doing it,
no,
right.
we can put items on the agenda going forward and all that kind of stuff. We will have them on there. Contract negotiating team.
So, I chair that, and Anastasia and I are the only school committee members that are on the actual subcommittee. And so I just want to say, in order for us to do a meeting, both of us have to be physically present. So that's one of the things that we're doing to comply with open meeting law. Yes,
Just
Anastasia.
very quick to clarify, so only, we typically have, they're two-part meetings. There are strategy meetings that take place before the actual negotiation sessions. And the negotiation sessions, we actually made sure that the negotiating team consists of the two of us, in addition to a couple of other members, Ms. Cunningham, who's seated here at the table, Mr. Mangano, and one other member of the ARPS HR staff, so that we actually are able to, in case somebody can't make it there, we still have a quorum and we can still attend those meetings. The strategy meetings, we need to be there in person, which is, yeah.
And so the other member is Ms. Jennifer Ortiz, and our Mark Terry, the attorney, also sits on these meetings. And so there are meetings scheduled throughout until February. They're 4-hour meetings, and you know, we're with the Amherst Pelham Educators Association, and so it's a new process for us to embark on interest-based bargaining. And so it's been going really well so far.
Cool.
Anything else, Anastasia, on that?
You got it.
Okay.
Data trust subcommittee hasn't met? Crickets, okay. Policy subcommittee,
We've not met. We're meeting on the 20th, I think,
Yeah.
right?
okay. Steve is on the recreational working group, he's not here tonight. Regional assessment working group. It's an agenda item later on, so we'll get to that later. School equity task force. We had, as was referenced earlier, the regional school committee had another joint meeting with the SCTF earlier, in which the SCTF presented a set of goals that they wanted to be reviewed for the consideration of the school committee, and then a series of recommended action steps that nest under those goals. And I thought it was, I mean, I'll kick it to the chair and to others who are present, but I thought it was a very productive, helpful, and good conversation. And I appreciated it particularly because we started to get more into the dynamic of how priorities are set, how goals are set, and then how working collectively, which in this case, context would mean the public at large, the SCTS specifically, the broader school committee and the administration, can work collaboratively to set goals and then translate them in appropriate ways that can then be implemented and tracked, measured over time, and can not only, see measurable benefits in terms of the professional and student life and achievement here in the district, but also create broader understanding of how we're doing and a better dialogue or improved dialogue that's fact-based, empirically based, and sort of strategically grounded. So I thought that was useful from my perspective. I'd like to follow up with the chair of the SCTF, but what I'd like to do is work with the superintendent to set an agenda item for a future regional school committee meeting that would be able to discuss in greater detail. Because I don't know, given what we have on the agenda, I don't know that we can go through the whole memo right now, but I'd love to do so in the near future and talk through it, as well as get into a dialogue around how that would be related to the committee's business and activities in a variety of dimensions, like budgeting, annual goals, all that kind of stuff. But, fair?
Yeah, so I think this is a great place for us to be, and it makes a lot of sense to try to strengthen or have the relationship as a subcommittee of the school committee. It makes sense for a particular committee to communicate and share our ideas and our priorities, so that way this body can act on it and figure out how does that influence what we endorse and support and vote on with as far as the superintendent's goals, as far as district improvement plans. How do we get it to land somewhere that it can actually, happen or flourish or grow or start, so that there's some accountability, and that the work of members of the School Equity Task Force who labor and put in many hours of their time, that there's an official body that can listen and act upon it.
So what we can do after this meeting is obviously we'll share it with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, but also with all the members of the committee, the memo that was sent to us. I just think, given the time, it's probably not going to be great to talk through the whole thing right now. But is there anything anyone else who is present wants to mention? Okay, so we have a path forward, we're going to have next steps, and it was a nice, positive conversation. CPAC.
I'm sorry, I just realized that CPAC was, there was supposed to be a basic rights workshop. Peter, do you remember when, has it been rescheduled?
Yes, I don't recall the date.
Okay. You know what, just give me one moment, I'll see if I can find the date.
Okay.
The next regular meeting of CPAC And the board is this Friday at 9 in the middle school PD room, I believe.
So I'm gonna avoid the superintendent evaluation subcommittee one for the same reason that we actually have an agenda item later on about superintendent evaluation process. Is there anything on the collaborative?
The collaborative, okay, so there's a meeting tomorrow, and we have a IBB meeting, don't we, in the evening? So that's, I can't attend the collaborative meeting as a result. So, and I'm also thinking we lack representation there. We have a seat there, and no one's,
Another
Jumped
seat
in.
from the region, or?
from the region, because I believe I represent Amherst
Oh,
School Committee. So,
okay.
it's once a month
So,
for a couple of hours.
put that in your thinking caps unless somebody wants to raise their hand right now.
Yes.
From the peanut gallery, comments that there is food apparently at said meeting. Phoebe?
Yeah, there's no date yet. We're gonna get it. And did
Okay.
you say Wildwood? That's where the next Friday meeting is.
I think it's the middle school, isn't it?
They're typically in middle school, but
I may be mistaken.
This month we will be at Wildwood is what I have written, but if that's different, I'll let everybody know.
Okay. Yeah.
Question. Does CPAC meetings typically get put on the ARPS website?
yes.
Yes? Okay.
Okay. Superintendent update.
So you have it in front of you. I'll be brief. So I want to thank Ms. Hazard for coming to our hurricane response effort. We've 50 people there. Short story, it was a wonderful event, and wonderful in that there were people from all sorts of agencies. We reached out, you never know who's going to come. We didn't anticipate 50 people, so that was a very positive response. There were, among the 50 were evacuees from Puerto Rico who are living here now. The majority were people in health and human service agencies, town officials, and some school officials. So very positive, in a group that now has an email listserv and taking action, next steps, and working with the community. For instance, Thursday, there's an event at Amherst College around similar topics. And so just like information sharing and kind of, you know, the health folks know about immunizations, right? So we're like, there's the goal was to promote collaboration between interested parties, and that really happened. The second is that Doreen and I, since your vote, your prior vote last month, we're hosting listening sessions at each school. So we were at the high school this afternoon. We were at the middle school last week. Well attended, and there are optional meetings that are beyond work hours, but between the two schools, it was over 50 staff members come in, and we have 4 basic prompts, and then we really just listen and take notes and give them an opportunity to ask us questions at the end. But it's, you know, what do you enjoy about your current role and where you are? What do you think the school or the district does really well? What are challenges you feel like your school is facing? And what are ideas you have to improve your school at the district? And that's pretty much all we've needed to say to have people share lots of really helpful information, both kind of ranging from large scale to very, very specific. So we'll hit, since it's a regional meeting, I'll just say Summit Academy, I believe, all of them are done in this month, but I think Summit Academy is when we get back from the Thanksgiving recess. So it's been really helpful to hear the teacher voice in there.
Are there any themes or ideas that you'd pick out to share this? Not that you're going to do something
Yeah.
about, but just that are important to you or meaningful to you?
Yeah, I'd like to, what I'm planning to do is try to do some qualitative analysis and coding after I've done all of
Okay.
them, and then bring that back here.
Great.
So that's my plan with it. But definitely some themes coming up that are not just kind of super specific to one department, but really even between the middle school and high school, there was a lot of overlap.
Right. Mr. Dominic?
How is this different than the labor management meetings? I don't know if I can,
Right.
if that's the word.
Yeah, so there's no discussions about contract language, or this is not through the APEA, and we let them know we're doing this. This is really just a session where, it's a good question, because there's occasionally pieces of overlap, but it's more just general as we're thinking about strategic planning and that process is going to get going. How do we include the staff and hear from them as part of the process? And I think, you know, one of the things that someone said today, and maybe this is one of the take-homes, was it was just nice to be listened to, right? And so separate from the content of what we heard, which was really important and powerful, it's also, we wanted to send a message to staff very clearly that we want them involved in kind of the future of the district, and sometimes it's easy to say that and different than doing a survey or something. Not that surveys don't have a place, but having face-to-face communication seems like it's worked well so far.
Right, I would agree.
The last one on the district-wide, and there's a flyer on the back. So speaking of the APEA, actually, we're hosting, but it's an event sponsored by the Amherst Pelham Teachers Educator Association, the Mass Teachers Association, and Amherst College Careers and Education program. So we're hosting a film backpack full of cash. It's gotten a lot of press lately, depending on the publication, good press or bad press. But it's about privatization and the cost of privatization on public schools. So it looks at New Orleans, Philadelphia, and I continue to forget the third city. The 2013
Nashville.
Nashville, thank
It's in
you.
your report.
There you go. I should just read, right? I always forget that. About corporate-driven reform and how that's, what the implications have been for students in the quote-unquote traditional public schools. And afterwards, Jean Fay, who's a president of the APA, but also a paraeducator at Crocker Farm, Barbara Maloney, the president of the MTA, and then Max Page, who's a parent in our district, an MTA board member, are going to host a panel where they talk about the film. And so we're really hoping lots of people come. It's not just in our communities, but across Western Mass. There's a film screening at the State House today, actually. 3 state legislators facilitated that. There was this film screening in September that Matt Damon actually went to. We can't promise that, right? Might get a better showing, who knows? But his mother was involved in the film, and there's one in Marshfield, I think, that the MTA is running. So it's a national film, but we're excited to host it, and everyone's welcome to come. Just quick regional budget ones. Last time I talked about the Summit Academy boiler was being fixed, and now it is fixed, and there's heat at Summit Academy, which, given the recent weather, is well appreciated. Last week there was an assembly at the middle school. They actually have 3 staff members which are veterans, and they had a really nice slideshow which showed the staff members as veterans. And for some of them that was quite a long time. Actually, for all 3 of them, it was quite a long time ago, but some longer than others, different engagements that they were involved in. But it was really a nice way to go into the weekend to talk about that. Today I was I got invited by Ned Young, who you all met last year, who was proposing the AP Computer Science course. So just as a follow-up, I said, I'd like to come sometime. So he said, oh, this would be a neat time to come. It was a neat experience in that I was way out of my element. It's not just like, oh, I remember sort of learning that. It was like I clearly never had learned what these students were learning, and they were great. They were learning about pseudo-random number generators, which is essentially what get used, in common parlance, like in slot machines, things like that. And the idea is that computers can't really do things at random because they're not able to do things at random. So how do you do that in building an app? So they're working on a coin flipping app that they've already made, and they're going to add features to it starting tomorrow. Students were great. It was really neat, and they're reading a book that I was perusing as well. And then next Tuesday they have an annual Thanksgiving celebration at Summit Academy, so I'll be there. And anyone who is willing, just let them know because they figure out food and all that. But it's an annual tradition at Summit Academy that's pretty special if you haven't gone. On giving thanks in this time of year. So just an open invitation for anyone on the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, I don't really have any. We've talked a little bit about agendas in the past, and we were obviously, I guess for the public's interest, if they missed the beginning where we went into executive session, the chair of Union 26 and I are continuing to follow up at the committee's direction in trying to secure a contract with the superintendent. Move those things forward. So lots of good stuff that hopefully is apparent in our agendas and the work we do. New and continuing business. Diverse Teacher Workforce Coalition Grant discussion and vote.
So I'll let Ms. Cunningham kind of describe this. We've talked about this at the last meeting. There's been more work, and both Ms. Cunningham and I have been involved. Ms. Cunningham at a deeper level. But the grant is still furiously being written. So Ms. Solomon at 5 Colleges, Inc. shared, which I think you received, a summary of where they are in that grant. And Ms. Westmoreland has a letter that perhaps Mr. Nakajima, if the vote is affirmative tonight, can sign. I think we spoke last time about kind of the goals and initiatives of the grant. I don't know if Ms. Cunningham would like to share a little more.
So once again, just to follow up, the intent of the grant is to increase the number of Blacks and Latinos who are paraprofessionals in our district to help them to become teachers. Based on your feedback the last time we spoke, we included, if you look at the first paragraph that talks about the opportunity, that last sentence shows that we included the words support Black, Latino, and other underrepresented paraprofessionals to become teachers. So it was just based on the conversation that we have Vietnamese and other paraprofessionals in our district that could use this kind of support. So those, they were added to the grant. We are looking to, if we do receive the grant, to now support the teachers for about 2 to 3 years to become, the parents to become teachers in 2 to 3 years. So we're looking at people who have bachelor's degrees currently, so they're considered the low-hanging fruit that we can work with very quickly. And in turn, we're looking for them to stay with our district for about 5 years. So the obstacles or the strategies that we're using right now is to remove some of the obstacles that we found have been hindering them from being able to become teachers. Some of the obstacles include the MTEL, which many have struggled to pass. And we found that we are looking to have tutors to help them, whether they're in person or via technology through like the Zoom program, where they can watch them online and have one person live assisting them. We're looking to, either way, get a person to come in and help them to be able to pass the MTEL exam, which is one of the professional obstacles that they face. Another thing is that many times they don't know which school offers a program or where they can get financial aid or any kind of assistance to get their education further. So through the grant, they are opening a program, some kind of technological program that'll help. It's a tool that'll help us to be able to say, okay, this is where you're at, and punching some information and say, okay, this is what you need to do based on the information you're giving us now. Kind of like the DESI tool that you see, where you're here and this is what you need to do now to get to the next step. So we're looking to create a resource guide. The other thing that we're looking to do is create a culture change within the district. So we would have to, the districts, each of the 4 districts would have to create a culture change plan. And the basis of that plan is to help the paras, once they become teachers, to now feel successful and appreciated and respected within their new environment and within their new roles. So we're asking for the committee to basically offer support and sign a letter of support for this grant to be put in place for us as a school district.
Okay, Ms. Hernandez?
I just have a question for Ms. Cunningham. A couple of these things, these are great ideas and great strategies, and I'm thrilled that you've put this together. It's a wonderful plan. A couple of these they appear to be labor intensive, and so even with the grant, I'm wondering how you will manage putting together a resource guide, for example, right, which could take up a lot of staff time, and I know you guys are actually down to the bare bones.
So I wish I could take credit for writing this, but I can't. The whole coalition, the 5 colleges in Marla Solomon, they have additional resources, and through one of the persons from, I think it's the Hampshire Career Center, they are actually creating the website or the resource guide for us to be able to use. Okay. And they will find someone to train all the participating districts and how to use that tool.
May I add?
Okay.
So I think the overall strategy of the grant is to have community partners like Ms. Cunningham, Damani Gordon, who works in the HR department, be supporting the work of external folks, as Ms. Cunningham mentioned, who have capacity to do that. So like, Damani would be on the MTEL prep and mentoring strategy team, so he'd be the conduit to let this group know, here's what our paras really need, and then they do some work and there's a feedback loop. And likewise, Ms. Cunningham would be on the culture change strategy team. So I think it's a nice model of utilizing the grants funds to build our capacity in a way that's consistent with not just our district, but the other three, but not adding incredibly to the workload of any of those districts, because everybody's, pretty straight out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? If they're not, I would entertain a motion for the committee to endorse the grant proposal and authorize the chair to sign a letter of endorsement.
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify aye by raising your hand. Carries unanimously.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. Looking forward to it.
This is exciting.
Thank you very much.
It's unlikely. Crow, you're wrong.
Now, item number 2, budget guidance, key indicators. Mangano.
Hello, everyone. So tonight is the second phase of our budget guidance process, and it is focused on key indicators. These would be variables that have either a direct or indirect impact on the budget process, giving you some historical context and trend, and a little bit of an idea of what the future looks like, so that when you see the budget come out this year, you'll have some context in terms of the driving forces behind, why is this going up or is this going down, that kind of stuff. So this presentation in general has been modeled after the town of Amherst model, which is look at trends, favorable, neutral, unfavorable. Figure they do a great job with it, so why recreate that? So you can see some similarities to that. So credit to the town of Amherst and the people who helped them develop their model. So the key points for the region, budgetary pressure has been caused by rising out-of-district tuitions and retiree costs, and that's primarily charter tuition, but you'll see some vocational tuition and choice tuition as well. The outlook for health insurance will add to these budgetary pressures. You can see that the trend has actually been quite good with health insurance, but that's just really through FY17, and that's going to change for FY18 and beyond. Operational costs like transportation, utilities, central office have been stable or declining. So I'd say sort of these sort of behind the scenes operational costs have actually helped preserve the budget in some ways. And lastly, member town financial support has preserved high levels of programming in our schools. So when other revenue sources have sort of dropped off, the town has really come to support the regional schools, and you'll see a little bit about that. So the first slide, and I'll show you real quickly so you can kind of orient yourself. So I could have done a better job with labeling, but just so you know, the category or the variable that we're looking at is noted in the table below. So you'll see where it says wages and benefits. That's the first one. And I'll note those as we go on, but as I click through, that's what will change so you know what you're looking at. So what this chart shows you is the percentage of total spending that has gone on for wages and benefits. And it looks at from FY09 to FY17. And then up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a little trend, favorable, neutral, unfavorable, and a little detail below that. So for the first one, wages and benefits, it's gone from about 70% of total spending back in FY09 down to about 64% for FY17. And so I've got that as favorable and unfavorable, which is, how can that be? One, we have the district has done a good job at sort of keeping staffing levels in proportion to students. So as we've seen enrollment declines, we've also reduced staffing sort of proportionally. So good examples at the middle school, as we've gone down in terms of our middle school per grade, we've reduced a half team in the past year to stay level with the students. So that's very favorable, is that we've been able to adjust and be flexible in that way. The unfavorable is that we have had actual programmatic cuts in the last 6 or 7 years that have affected staffing that way. So that's unfavorable from an educational perspective, obviously. Total spending, so this is health insurance, so just looking at active employee health insurance. It was around 10% back in FY09, it's around 8.3% for FY17, so again, that's a favorable trend through FY17. And really throughout that time, premium rates have stayed flat for our health insurance or gone down. But as we know, for FY18, we've seen a 10% premium increase for HMOs and a 20% or so premium increase for PPOs. And that may not be enough going forward, we might need more. So favorable trend so far, outlook not so good for health insurance. Retiree costs. So this is health insurance for retirees and also the pension assessment that the district pays for retirees. So that was 7% back in FY09, and it's 8.5% in FY17. The two major drivers of that unfavorable trend have been larger retiree pool, so we've had more retirees, we go a little longer, so the pool's grown. The cost hasn't necessarily grown. Again, health insurance has been, the premium has been pretty flat during that time. And also our pension assessment has grown. So the Hampshire County pension system that we belong to, they have a goal of being fully funded by 2034, 35. Fully funded meaning that they want to have all these reserves aside for all future retirees, so that they're not sort of funding as they go. We have the reserve set up. But what that means is every year our assessment is going up quite a bit to help close that gap. So a big chunk of this increase is just from the pension assessment going up. Charter tuition went from 2.5% of total spending to 5.5% of total spending. During that time frame, the Chinese charter school in Hadley expanded from K-6 to K-12. So we've seen a lot of growth at the regional level as those grades have sort of filled with students. School choice tuition. This is a neutral trend. There was a little bump in FY 15 and 16, and we've seen it start to come back down for 17. I'd say overall, these are pretty good levels as we look at our neighbors and sort of what proportion of choice either they have for tuition costs. So I'd say relatively it's strong, and we're trying to get that level back. Vocational tuition, sort of two things going on here. So there's a little anomaly in FY13. The district decided to use its school choice funds to cover vocational tuition that year, so it wasn't in the operating budget. So that's why you see a little drop off. And then we also saw the same sort of bump that we saw in school choice in FY15 and 16. That we think was driven primarily by new programs that were put into place at Smith. They had a nursing program and a criminal justice program along with some sports. So we saw a little uptick in enrollment, but that cost has also come back down as well recently. Special ed out-of-district tuition is about 2.9% of the budget back in FY09. It's about 2.8%. So it's really neutral trend. Again, relative to other districts, it's really strong. In terms of the number of kids we have out of district, we do a good job keeping them in-house.
What is that?
That is when we can't meet the needs of a student in the district. We find a school outside the district that can. So it doesn't happen all that often, but it's more common in the secondary level. Transportation. So one of the things I mentioned before in terms of being positive for the district, transportation costs are about 4.8% of total spending back in 2009. It's down to about 4.5%. We've been able to, as we do transportation contracts or consolidate routes, again, relative to enrollment, we try to get bus routes to scale down as our enrollment goes down. So, you know, even, I think somewhere in there we have a really big uptick in gasoline prices, but you can't really see it in the trend because we were able to soften the blow.
But for that reason, you also don't see savings as it came back down.
Right, yeah. You never see any more if we didn't have that. Utilities went from about 3.6% of total spending in 2009, so this is heating, water, electricity, down to 2.1% FY17. So utilities have been really, great trend year after year. We've seen it go down. I think at some point we're going to kind of reach a bottoming out point because I don't know how much farther it can go down. We do still hope to see some savings from our off-taking agreement with the solar field, which should bring the electricity costs down even a little bit further. But some of the other costs, I think, are sort of hitting a low point. We're going to switch to revenues. So Chapter 70 is what we're looking at right now. Chapter 70, and this is what percentage of the budget is supported by that revenue source. So back in 2009, Chapter 70 made up 33% of the total spending, and in FY17 it's down to 31.5%. So consistent with what we've seen before, which is our growth in Chapter 70 really has not matched our growth in spending, and it's had to be made up with other funds. This is transportation reimbursement. Because we're a regional school district, it was about 3.15% back in 2009. It's 2.5% in 17. There was a real big drop off in 10. That was when the state had some financial troubles back then, so they really slashed regional transportation aid. But then every year since then, they've slowly ticked it up a little bit here and there. But we still have quite a ways to go to get to full funding. So it's a neutral trend because it has been growing, but more work to do.
What would fully funded put us at?
So full funding would put us somewhere around $1 million, a little bit more. In terms of the percent, I can't do that right now, but it would be somewhere around $1 million if we were to, our funding levels right now are about 70%. So it'd be 30% more in terms of the reimbursement rate.
Is that fully funding statutorily required, and they're just not meeting the statute?
So it's like a lot of statutes, which says you will fully fund this, subject to appropriation. So that's subject to appropriation that always gets us. MARS, the Mass Association of Regional Schools, has pushed some legislative pressure in the past because there's been times when they've cut regional transportation aid, but they haven't cut Chapter 70, and there's some law out there that they're kind of supposed to move together, because if you just do Chapter 70 or regional transportation aid, you're sort of disproportionately targeting regional schools and not all public schools. But they didn't make it very far with that. So, yeah, I think the law does say full funding, but it's subject to appropriations.
Okay.
Just briefly, I was at a meeting where MARS, Mass Association of Regional Schools, was present this morning, well, participating virtually. But one of the things that Mr. Nakajima and I will connect about is there was a state auditor report which was sent to you about regional schools and funding, and so there's some political advocacy I think that is worth considering around the question that has been the last two questions.
Yeah, I actually think it would be good at a future iteration of this information to be able to report out in a circumstance where there's a clear, just setting aside that language, there's a clear statutory obligation. So for charter reimbursement, transportation reimbursement, it'd be nice to know what the delta is, and then we're sort of tracking it. I think it's useful to know.
Yeah, and so none of you have your budget books with you today, so I'm a little disappointed. But in the executive summary of your budget book, got anything in it? Or is it empty? No. In the executive summary, actually, there's a chart that shows for charter and regional transportation aid what full funding is and what we've actually received. And so the difference is range from $300,000 to $400,000 between the two that we should get more if they were fully funding. But we can bring that chart back so you can, and we'll update it again for the budget document this year.
Great.
And then the last one is town assessment. So again, I mentioned before, towns have come to support the regional schools when their funding sources have fallen off. You can see that in FY09 they funded about 60% of the spending, and in FY17 it's at 65%. So it's a very favorable trend, and we appreciate their support. So just some other concerns that aren't really graphed here, but just to keep in mind, declining enrollment, obviously, we talked about that. We are seeing continued declining enrollment into the middle school for the foreseeable future. There may be a little plateau in the next couple of years, but then it's going to keep going down. Assessment methods, which you'll hear more about tonight, is sort of a wild card in terms of how much town support we get. And then reserve levels, so we have our reserves are sort of a delicate balance. We can only have up to 5%, so don't want to go too high, but then if you try to use more to get it down, then you might go down too low. So we have to sort of maintain that balance of keeping strong reserves, especially if we're going to borrow for capital projects in the future. That's one of the key variables that bond rating agencies look at is your reserve level. Questions, feedback?
Yes, we've done
that.
Oh, sorry, Mara.
I was just gonna say how I appreciated the graphics. Yeah, I don't, if this is new, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The way it's presented.
And the nice thing is now that it's set up, it's really easy
User-friendly.
to just add a year every year, kind of like
Yeah.
the town.
And I think that town meeting it's helpful for
Yeah.
town meeting as well.
Yeah, consistency is good.
Shuttling something? You did.
Yeah, okay, so one, yes, this is an excellent presentation. I like the little explanatory blurb on the right. It's a
Yeah.
great qualitative
There you go.
addendum to the data.
Yeah, there's a misspelled word in there somewhere, but I already printed it.
It's really nice. It's really educational. Just from a pure data geek perspective,
Mhm.
if you don't fix the bottom of the y-axis at 0, you can see the change in the trend in the line a lot easier, right? Which is what we're really trying
Right.
to look at is the trend.
Yeah,
I know the
tried-
data's right there, but
No, I hear you, and so
otherwise
I
they're
struggled
just
with
really flat.
with some of these. The scale is so different.
Yeah.
In terms of the percentage.
Yeah.
That it was hard to see.
Yeah.
It was hard to see what the trend was.
Right.
But I agree with you. Like for revenue, I had to sort of switch it from sort of 0 to 50 to back to 0 to 100 and have a different. So I get what you're saying, but maybe we can work on a
Yeah.
better way to make that visual.
In your defense, do you give them actual magnitudes, which is more important than the chart?
Yeah, no, but I'm always open to if there's better ways to do it. I'm certainly open to that.
Shuttling did another thing.
Yes, this
I remember
non-data
that.
geek
It is.
comment. I could go on data geek. So as part of this stage in your budget planning process, do you look at potential additional revenue streams? Like one thing that came up as I was looking through this was the increasing number of students we have from parents at UMass student housing, and I know that there is an update, or there's some effort at the town level to look at that I'm completely spacing on, looking to our superintendent
There's a
for.
study.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, they're working on a study through the
And I
Downey
didn't,
Institute.
yeah, I was gonna wait until the very end of school committee planning to ask for what the status of, the timing of that was, but I know it was too tangential to this budget discussion.
I can, would you like
Do
me
you
to?
have a quick summary?
Yeah, so the study is planned to be completed in the month of January. And I think this thing to be really clear, for me to be really clear about is the goal of the study is to identify the real cost of students living in tax exempt housing. It is not, there's no agreement for the university to, or us, to really do anything about that. I mean, that's sort of the starting point for discussion. So I think the January, I wouldn't want people watching or here to think that in January, boom, there's now a new revenue stream. It's really trying to get, can we get a really accurate number to begin having those discussions?
Right.
Yeah, and to your question, I think there's a limited number of sort of revenue sources outside of the town and Chapter 70 and the state predictable ones that are sort of sustainable where you could build your budget based on them.
Right.
But we are pursuing you heard one grant just now. We are pursuing a number of other grants that will fund sort of specific initiatives that the district is hoping to work on. I know there's a couple food service ones we're looking at. So there's a number of things like that. But in terms of big picture, recurring, sustainable, there's just there's not a lot out there to go after.
I'm probably going to do this anyway, but I would actually encourage you to fix the titles on these things.
Yeah, put it up at the top.
Yeah, gave me a slight headache earlier trying to figure out.
I can do that.
What each slide was about. Yes, Denise.
I'm just, also want to thank you for putting this together. I'm looking at this information and I'm finding myself wondering if there's any way for us to sort of predict or forecast kind of where we should be, right? Like if there was, silver lining on some of these items, right? And there's the state stuff, but then there's also just potential changes that we could be making at a district level. There must be conversations that you guys are having, all of you together, saying, we really wish we could be here, or we should be here in this particular place, but instead we're here. So, you see it when we're making these decisions about whether something is favorable or unfavorable. That has to be, I would imagine, factoring into your rating system. And so if that's the case, I think it would be helpful to know, where you see the deficits, because I think we can draw our own conclusions about certain things, like, the charter school reimbursement, for example, like Chapter 70, we would imagine, we think we know where that should be based on, sort of state law and information. But realistically speaking, I don't know where we should be. And so at what point does that start to really impact the budget decisions that have to be made, right? Because if we're seeing ourselves in this sort of deficit model where we're down, 20% from where we should be, that immediately starts to trigger conversations about, okay, well, do we need to make cuts? Or are there certain things that are going to be sacrificed, on behalf? Or on the opposite end of it, too, like if we're, 20% above where we think we should be, does this mean we can hire more people, right? So, I know it's a big picture kind of question, but I think that's sort of where my brain is right now, where I'm thinking about this.
Do you want me to?
You want to take that one?
Sure. So, I think the challenging thing for us is that I think last time we talked about budget, someone raised the concept, not advocating for it, but like zero-based budgeting, right? And so, I think I shared that I've done that twice in different roles in the district, and I think it's a hard process without we're talking about strategic planning this year, like without having some really clear goals, it's hard to really figure out how to do that. And so many of our costs are fixed. And what I mean by that is we're going to teach math. We're not going to be like, geez, we're done with math. Like we're out of that game. So I think there's some limits to the flexibility we have. I do think the kind of like if we were doing a SWOT analysis, the threat part of it would be kind of, and I'm not going to pick on charters, but just students exiting the district for a whole number of reasons and the costs associated with them. Health insurance is a huge variable, this year, and then kind of what happens with those two over time. Some of the other ones, not that there isn't to focus on, but those are two really big ticket items that influence us. I think what we're trying to do now is marry at the central office level, which is where kind of this starts kicking off, how to marry what we believe our future reality is with the work that we want to do, and how do we make the best sense of that. And I think in the next month or so, I got a bunch from Sean today, we're going to start having those conversations with principals about how to do that at a building level. I do feel one of the challenges is, when you use the word deficit, mode, and I think with few exceptions, that's been the reality of the regional school district for a while. And it's, with the declining enrollment, we have some decisions, and this is some conversations we need to have collectively here as well about what do we think about declining enrollment, and what's the cost benefit of choice, the level of choice we're taking. And at some point, we collectively as an organization are going to have to make a decision about if the enrollment declines like we believe it is. And I'm not talking about elementary, like young kids. I'm saying kids that are currently in the Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury elementary schools. That's going to be a hard conversation to have, because if you play those numbers out over 4 or 5 years, that declining enrollment only accelerates. And there's a whole range of options what to do with that. But that's the kind of big picture thinking that we're going to have to do, is look at our financial picture, look at the number of students coming in, and choice. I think we've been very expeditious about our use of choice in the past. I think we're going to hit a critical moment where we have to draw a line in the sand. Are we going to maintain our schools at the size they are by increasing choice? If not, what's our other alternative? We're not there yet, but it's the thing that we think about when we head towards the future. I know hopefully that's sort of addressing the types of thing you were asking. I know it's sort of like big picture-ish, but that's what we think a lot about.
I think that would be, if you felt prepared to do it, and it wasn't creating another huge work strain, I think it would actually be worth having a conversation where we dig into some of these topics
Absolutely.
in more depth and look out a few years, look at the actual numbers and trends, and not for the purposes of you drawing hard conclusions, but rather, it's a little bit, without being as deadly boring as OPEB, it's a little bit like having a conversation about something like OPEB, where there's a reality of the financing funding you've got to be doing. You know what I mean? There are real numbers you can look at to have an informed conversation, and even an informed conversation about what the implications of it are. This is a dumb question. I think last year this question came up and it was answered already. But is our staff distributed evenly by age cohort in such a way that there either is or isn't a bump of retirees that we'd likely get at some point, in which obviously you lose wonderfully talented staff that who are been treasure to our district, but you also typically replace them with cheaper, new wonderful staff who are going to be great and then make more money over time. And I don't know, I assume you look at that and forecast what you think your payroll is going to look like. Have we talked about that before? Is there any sense of it?
It doesn't, I think what we've seen is most of our staff, they don't teach like just one grade. At least from what I've seen, they're sort of spread out. So they may teach a 12th grade class, but they also teach a 12th grade class or 11th grade something and a 10th grade. So it's not like, oh, that big 12th grade class went out, we can reduce classrooms, sort of like the way you might think of it at the elementary level.
I'm not really talking about that.
Okay.
I'm saying to be more blunt.
Yeah.
You could look at the staff we have, and say either the attrition through retirement of teachers
just a bump in terms
is other staff, obviously all the other staff, is either organized in such a way in which you are sort of losing and replacing on a fairly consistent basis, in which you never really, then also other people are stepping up in a way that sort of keeps that consistent, or it isn't. I mean, and I'm just saying conceptually, like I haven't talked to people about this, but I imagine that since I know the town's population boomed dramatically back in the late 60s and early 70s, my guess is there probably was a fairly large cohort of teachers at the elementary and secondary level who retired out, but they probably all retired already.
Well, we've seen a steady.
That's the question I'm getting at.
I think we can get to that. I think DESE actually has some nice reports on the age distribution of your workforce, so we can bring that.
I'm just saying I'd add that sort of, or any number of other sets of things that go into this other question about enrollment. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. We have that data, and we saw a large wave sort of like 6, 7, 8 years ago, and I think that's the generation that you're speaking of, both at elementary and secondary. There is a little bit of a mini wave. I think the other thing we've seen is that there's an age component. There's also what's going on in the national economy influences retirement age as well.
Sure.
I can think we thought we were going to have so many in like 2008, 2009 because we had those, and a number of people retracted their desire
That happened
to
everywhere
retire.
else in the economy.
Right, absolutely, and it happened here as well. So I think there's multiple factors, but we have all that data. Teachers in our district do typically. We ask them to let us know if they're going to retire a year and a half, 18 months before they actually do. So we have data, very soon we'll have data not just for this year, but for the following year. But I think looking at long-term trends, we have enough data to make a reasonable prediction.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I feel like I need to say this out loud.
Yeah.
I'm not asking this question because I think it's a good thing or for anyone to leave or retire. That has nothing to do with anything like that.
Right.
I know that at the state level, every other year, it seems, or every few years, there's some sort of like buyout program to encourage people to retire. I'm not suggesting anything remotely like that. I'm literally just saying, if we're going to take a look at longitudinal data, and we're going to, and projections, and look at different variables that are going to affect budgeting, that happens just to be one of them. There are a number of others, obviously.
Absolutely.
Other comments? Somebody gave?
How does the enrollment working group tackle some of these issues or questions?
So that's looking purely at the elementary schools. So I think the good thing that is relevant is we have good data now about enrollment projections at those schools, which will eventually be secondary school students. And if we're looking at long-range projections, some of the data that group has collected will be really helpful. But that group is solely looking at the K to 6 or pre-K to 6 Amherst elementary schools.
Okay.
So we're looking at strictly Amherst, but what about Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham?
Yeah. So we have that data. I mean, that group hasn't been studying it, but, Pelham we certainly have. I work for that school district as well, and my colleague in Union 28 we actively talk about the enrollment trends in those communities. And certainly because we have 7-year, we have current kindergarten numbers in all four towns, we can project that out pretty far for what's going to happen in the regional schools in the next 10 years.
That's what it is.
2 other quick points. I know Mr. John Hornick has
Yeah.
emailed us around his passion to make sure Amherst has affordable housing
Yeah.
for families with, children to be able to live in our community and send their schools here. I'm interested in getting data around these population broken down by race.
Mhm.
So are we experiencing dramatic declines or non-so-dramatic declines in which group,
Mhm.
of students? That would be interesting
Mhm. Yeah.
research.
We have access to that.
Right. The, if we're gonna,
Oh, I was
No,
gonna
please
say
go
that,
ahead.
as part of the declining enrollment group, we have done that, so we do have that information, available to share with you.
it's great, it might be nice if we're gonna have a presentation on this topic or dig deeper, maybe if you had a framework for some of the items that were gonna be on it,
Mhm.
we could share that out with the committee and see if there are any questions they respond to me. And I think in the context, I'd be comfortable that if any one of the 3 of you were doing that,
Yeah.
we could have the responses go back either to Debbie or to you to just ask, because I think my guess is the more we look at, the more questions people are gonna have without being overly burdensome, or it can be slotted in where you can't answer a question in one presentation, but be down the road a month later you can. I think that'd be a healthy way of doing the dialogue, not dialogue, getting you feedback to have a dialogue here without constraining us to say, right this second, we're gonna come up with every question we can think of. Because I'm actually comfortable with moving on if others are. I hear that. And besides, you're still up, man. This next discussion.
Share one.
Oh, I'm sorry. yes,
One
go
question,
ahead.
I was just wondering if we could just kind of say what's next in the budget process, just so we know what our next steps
Oh,
are.
absolutely.
Great question. So at the December 15th is what's in my head, but I don't know if that's the 12th. We have a number of people coming to speak to you about the specific programs that you asked for more information on. One of them was athletics, clubs, OPEB, you guys picked for some reason, you guys are crazy. And a couple other items that we have lined up. So actually the principal today sent me a list of who's coming to speak on those, and so that's the next step. Sort of the final leg in the budget guidance process, unless you want to add anything else to it. And that'll be at the December 12th meeting.
Right. And so the next is Regional Assessment Working Group update.
Yes, so I'm going to do a condensed version of the presentation that was given.
Nice color and style choice, by the way.
Yes.
This is.
I like it. Sometimes I switch it up from
You're
the,
just switching
the
it up.
district
I'm just
template.
acknowledging the fact there's a little creativity going on here.
So I'm going to give a condensed version of the presentation that our consultant, Mark Abrams, gave to the working group at the meeting on last Tuesday? So Mark made a recommendation on an assessment method, then he gave a little rationale, and had time for feedback, then went over timeline and next steps. So the consultant's recommendation was option S10. So quick reminder, all these options have labels like S1 through 10, and some of those have been rejected over time with the working group. S10 in particular, the one he recommended, is a statutory assessment method that allocates the excess above the minimum contribution, which is determined by the state, by a 50-50 composite of a 5-year rolling average of enrollment and median aggregate income. So median aggregate income was one of those sort of newer variables that the working group sort of across the board really liked for some reason, or not for some reason, they liked it because they realized that there are some discrepancies in towns where one town may have a really high earning person that inflates their income disproportionately, and that this might help bring that back to the center. So the reasons below are sort of why he recommended it, blends wealth and enrollment, fewer factors to calculate, so it's a little easier to explain relative to some of the other options. Excess is split, as I said, based on averages, so it helps smooth out the year-to-year changes a little bit. And the financial impact is less onerous for each community and would not require a transition plan. So the way he got to this is he did a evaluation based on some criteria, which I'll show you, to sort of whittle it down. We had about 8 or 9 options to whittle it down to 3. And then he took those 3 and did sort of a financial sustainability analysis, basically looked at it and said, could this actually be done in each town? Could they afford this? And that's how he got to his recommendation. So these were the variables: predictability, volatility, recurring, timely, based on wealth, understandable, and independence. He didn't weight any of these, so they're all weighted evenly. We would have debated forever if we got into weights for each of these criteria, so they are all equally weighted. So these are the charts that show the scoring that he gave to each of the options. We have 10 options up there. There's some, like you'll see S9B, S9, S9B, S9C. They're all sort of the same idea with a slightly different wrinkle variation on the initial concept. So there's a couple like that. So we ranked all of them. The overall ranking turned out with S4 as the highest ranked. That's our sort of current statutory method. If we were going to go with a method that's based on our current regional agreement with no changes. S1 came in second. That would be if we did our current regional agreement statutory method, but we broke out transportation separately. We don't currently break out transportation separately, but if we did and said, let's allocate it based on transportation miles, that's what S1 is. And then S10 is what I said before about minimum contribution, excess by enrollment, and median aggregate income.
Which of these is the one that was done, the sort of the Mangano medley?
None of these.
None of
We did
these,
not like
okay.
those. So that was, none of these, it was sort of a, it was none of these.
It was none of these, okay.
Yeah, because that was not a statutory method, and the group was pretty,
Okay.
the group actually agreed on going towards a statutory method because it only requires 3 towns to approve as opposed to the 4 towns that we have to get every single year now. So it has a lower threshold for approval.
Yep.
Not for.
Oh,
not for
Oh, I'm
bad
sorry, I
ones.
I
hadn't
didn't mean
called
to.
me.
You have another question?
So even if it's a partially statutory.
So the way the statutory method works is all statutory means is that you will use the minimum contribution as the basis for your
Okay.
assessment.
Okay.
In almost every town, the minimum contribution doesn't actually represent the full assessment because it's low based on the foundation budget, which is way lower than most towns spend. So all it says is you will start with the minimum contribution, and then everything above the minimum contribution you will allocate according to your regional agreement.
Okay.
So really, anything could be statutory as long as we start with the minimum contribution and change our regional agreement to what we want to use going forward.
Ms. Green?
How does the S10 method compare to the Lugano method? Which towns increase, which towns decrease?
We'll get to that. But the main difference is the method we used was really just saying X percentage will be based on taxable property values or proportionate minimum contributions. This is full statutory, so it's be using the full minimum contribution. So more of this is based on wealth, is one way to describe it. So this was a summary. So the long and the short of it, again, S10, S1, and S4 were the 3 methods that the consultant whittled it down to, or the three methods. And then this is sort of his rationale. He gave a little, what the method is, what the score was, a little comment on it, and then we selected the final 3. So then he did a little bit of a financial analysis. So this first piece is a look back that he did, and essentially it's if we were on each of these assessment methods, the top one is S1, the middle is S4, and the bottom is S10. If we were on these methods for the last 4 years, what would the change have been over that time? And in general, they all sort of move in the same direction, just slightly different scales, or sometimes more than slightly. But for example, in all cases, Amherst would have gone up about 10% over that time. Pelham would have gone down over that time. Leverett would have gone down, and Shutesbury would have gone up. So all basically moving in the same direction.
Ms. Green?
If it's based on wealth, I assume Pelham is one of the wealthier communities. Why does it go down to Pelham?
Because it's based on wealth and enrollment, and so Pelham's enrollment has gone down over that time. So these charts you saw a little bit last time. The only difference is I grayed out all the options that were not the final three, so you can still sort of see the context from which we were looking at this. And so this is by each town. The green is, or the red is S1, the green is S4, and the dotted pink, the small dots, is S10. So from my perspective, when I looked at these, I was sort of looking, as representing all 4 towns, what's sort of in the middle. Because for all 4 towns, what's sort of in the middle, because that means one town's not going to be disproportionately affected. So I think that that sort of, rough analysis also led to S10 being one of the better options. You can see it's in the middle there. It's in the middle for Pelham here, among all the options we looked at. It's in the middle for Leverett, and it's also in the middle for Shutesbury.
What's nice about that is, with all respect to the scoring and the criteria, there's an arbitrary element to whether somebody gets one method gets a 59
Or 58.
or 58.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't, it's interesting, but it's not completely persuasive.
Yeah.
This is, I think, this and some of the other data that tries to project,
Yeah.
estimate how it would have either impacted us in the past or in the future.
Yeah.
It's sort of more compelling to me.
And that question's come up, and so again, my response is that we didn't use the criteria to pick the final. We kind of used it just to narrow it down, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
And actually, Mr. Tricky from Pelham, who's the chair of the finance committee, he did the same analysis I did, but he actually just did it with numbers. So he looked at the savings under each of these options, ranked it 1 through 10, and said what one was averaged in the middle for all 4 towns, and he came to the same conclusion. Totally unscripted. But so either way you look at it, came out the same. So this is sort of the look forward, and I'd say it's really helpful and based on assumptions of what the future will look like. So just keep that in mind. FY18 actual assessment is on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, depending on what way you're looking at it. And then there's a projection of what the 19 assessment will be and the 20 assessment will be under each of the 3 options. Again, S1 at the top, S4 in the middle, and S10 at the bottom. The blue shaded is the dollar change over each year, so how much did it increase from 18 to 19, and then how much did it increase from 19 to 20, and then all the way to the far side is the percentage increase. So for we don't have our Leverett Shutesbury officials. Too bad. For the top one, S1, I think the concern I would have is, it's a larger increase for Amherst in the guidance, and B, Shutesbury actually goes up, which I think the data we looked at around wealth would suggest Shutesbury would be a lesser wealthy town relative to these other ones. So the fact that they're actually going up, I think it would make this sort of a difficult one to pass. The second option, S4, I think the main thing that sticks out is Amherst would get walloped with a $800,000 increase in the first year, which would be 5%. And that's consistent with when we've looked at this in the past, and we've looked at switching to the statutory method. It really, our current statutory method, it really wallops Amherst in the first year. And by wallops Amherst, I mean it could wallop the regional school district if the town of Amherst can't afford that assessment. It may be the region has to reduce its budget. And that's why I talk about the percentage of assessment supporting the budget. The assessment method could affect that if we switch to a method that reduces that overall level. And then the last one, S10, you can see Amherst goes up 2.5, which is for FY19, which is consistent with their guidance. Pelham goes up 3, that goes up the most, they go up 3.4, so it is an increase for Pelham. I wouldn't say it's marginal, but it's not like a devastating increase either. Leverett stays pretty flat, and Shutesbury goes down 1.7%. And then if you go to the next year, FY20, again, Amherst goes up within the guidance that we typically receive. Pelham goes down a little bit, Leverett goes down a little bit, and Shutesbury goes up 2.5%.
I hate to ask this question, but I just wanted to understand, in a circumstance, let's say hypothetically, in which a method were chosen in which the assessment to Amherst was above the guidance and above what the town was willing to spend, under that circumstance, conceptually, you understand the regional budget would have to be cut. But would then the assessments to the other towns be recalculated downward so that it was still proportionate to what the method would require?
If we were using the statutory method, yes. If we were going to agree to an alternative method that year, which we've done in the past, you could sort of do what you want within some bounds. But if you just had to get one town's assessment down, but you didn't want to reduce the other town's assessments, you'd have to come up with some sort of alternative.
So either the
method.
either the four towns would have to agree to an alternative that tried to hold the district budget as harmless as possible, or alternately, the first cut from, in this case, conceptually Amherst, would then trigger a reset that would then cause a further set of cuts.
Yeah, and one thing I'll clarify real quick is if we're on the statutory method, you only technically need 3 towns to approve. We don't like to do that because we don't like to say to a town, hey, these other 3 towns are going to approve it, so you've got to come up with the money. That hasn't been our approach. We've always tried to work really collaboratively with the towns. But just so everyone's on the same page, technically under the statutory method, you only need 3 out of 4 to approve the budget. And then all the towns would have to pay what their assessment is.
So, sorry to ask, follow up then.
Mhm.
So, again, hypothetically, and I guess I won't use names now.
Sure.
If 3 towns passed a budget that required the 4th town to spend more money,
The 4th
would
town
that
would have to.
require
Yep.
the town meeting of that other town to approve a budget that's higher than they're willing to approve?
They wouldn't have to approve it, but it would still become the budget because you had 3 out of 4. You had the
So how's
2/3
the money
majority.
appropriated?
Legally, they'd have to appropriate it, even if it was rejected. We would provide, we've never done this, but in theory, we would provide evidence that the other 3 towns approved it, and so their town meeting would have to come back to it and appropriate it.
God, that would be fun.
I don't think so.
Not at all.
And I was like, no, I'm just being sarcastic.
And again, to
And
be
I'm
clear,
saying wretched
that's
thing.
not our approach that
Right.
we've taken.
I apologize for laying, actually, in a way, I think it's useful to lay out the logic of this
Yeah.
stuff, because then it's not as if finding the most stable and predictable method that can smooth out changes is just because you're being politic or nice.
Mhm.
It's because there's actually really substantial
Mhm.
challenges that can fall to the
Yeah.
towns, or into the district, both.
Yep.
And obviously, teachers and kids eventually. Superintendent.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was at the last 2 meetings, actually, of the working group, and a point that I made, and others as well, is this is one piece of the pie, right, which is how the assessment formula is calculated. A second one, particularly in the scenarios that other regional school districts find them, is even if you have a formula you like, how much does the district feel like it needs to support, in the school committee passing a budget, then to bring to town meetings.
Mhm.
So I don't want anyone to have, not here, but I'll just say it publicly, this vision that we've solved the assessment issue and then the budget issue goes away.
Yeah.
There's a connection between the two.
Mhm.
But like if we play out option 2, S4 above, right, like, which is our current method, right? If nothing happens, that's our default at the moment, right? Then there's gonna be a lot of discussions about what we need, what we don't need, how do we function given this, and that sort of came up as a secondary part of that meeting. So I think while you can't totally separate the two between assessment methodology and assessment, they are distinct things, and particularly the 3 out of 4 towns needing to vote to force the 4th town in that kind of doomsday scenario, in my opinion. That's a different level of conversation. It's not just about method, it's actually about funding and how the district passes.
Mr. Marino.
How is the recommendation accepted?
Good question. So right now, all the reps on this working group have gone back to their boards to sort of share this recommendation and get further feedback. And we have a meeting on November 28th for everyone to come back and sort of reconvene and say either yes, we like this, or no, we don't like this. In order to go with S10, because it's a different, it would involve changing the regional agreement. The first year to go to S10, we would have to get all 4 towns to approve. Even though I said that 3-town thing before, the first year we'd have to modify the regional agreement, which would require all 4 towns.
Mhm.
After that, S10 would become our new statutory method, and we would only need 3 out of 4. But the process would be the school committee would actually vote that method. So if the working group is all supportive, we would bring the budget to you this year with that method. You would vote the amendment to the regional agreement along with the assessments that are calculated by that method, and then it would go to the 4 towns to approve the amendment that you approved. In the past, we did that just last year, but it was a 1-year amendment. We said for 2018 only. We are going to going to assess based on this. If we were going to go with this method, we would not call it a one-year amendment. We would say this is a permanent or quasi-permanent, nothing's permanent, but a long-term amendment.
Yes.
So I appreciate the fact that the S10 is not the one that was sort of ranked the highest, and that there were other, because it says to me that there were other considerations that were brought into play here. And I think in terms of the conversation that we've been having around the 4 towns and the importance of making sure that people, no one feels like they are getting this sort of the short end of the stick, that's really important.
Yeah.
One thing that I didn't hear is what the drawbacks would be for S10, if any. I'm sure that the consultant must have done some sort of analysis to figure that out.
Yeah. I think the major drawback, I mean, from my point of view, this consultant didn't really get into that too much, is just we're introducing a new variable, I think, into the assessment method, which would be the median aggregate income. That variable comes, at least the way we did this, came from the census, which is once every 10 years with estimated changes each year. So in some ways it's very stable. In other ways it's, in those off years, it's based on estimates. So I think that could be a potential drawback, maybe not necessarily, but just that we're introducing a new variable that could be confusing to some people. And again, the 50-50 composite, I think we can find ways to illustrate it really clearly, but that in itself isn't necessarily an intuitive concept. At least we haven't used that in the past, so we'd have to do some education work around what does that actually mean. We have to be very clear in the regional agreement how that's done, the steps and things like that. So I guess one drawback would just be it's a change to our current process, which will require some education.
Can I ask you a question? Did you look at the variation between median income under the decennial census and the previous year's estimates? Because, I mean, I've used that data before in the past, and
Yeah.
it actually, it can be, it's
Yeah.
different in ways that if you're doing ordinary sort of, retail analysis or housing analysis, are not always super meaningful. In the case of doing an aggregate median income and then working that out through this formula,
Yeah.
I imagine what might be modest differences to somebody who's doing a market analysis to open up a diner might seem very significant when played out in a formula like this.
Right. So I guess can you repeat did we compare the
Well,
estimates to the original?
As you described it, at each decennial census, you have sort of a universal count of the actual reported median income. In between that, there are estimates that are done that have error rates in them. And so between 1999 and 2000, you'd be moving from an estimate, let's say, to the actual reported median income, and presumably
So seeing how
this
close
method would
that was.
reset to whatever the decennial one is. And I'm just curious whether anyone bothered looking at what those differences were.
I don't
That's how
think we
meaningful
did
they
that, but we could certainly look at that. Originally, we were actually trying to get actual median income numbers from the Department of Revenue.
Yeah.
We were trying to get lists from each town so we could find the median, but they weren't willing to provide us that data. So we were hoping to have some sort of a recurring that wasn't an estimate. But we can certainly look at that and see.
The only reason for the exact sort of like risk issue you're talking about the variability, that it might only happen once every 10 years.
Yeah.
But it's possible once every 10 years, whoa Nelly, what happens to our data, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's always possible.
And I think there's still some discussion. I mean, I don't know if I'm not saying this is good or bad. There could also be discussion that maybe we don't do the estimates. We just use the most recent 10-year, so you're based on actual data. And it's very stable for 10 years. But that might not fly, so.
When's the 4-town meeting?
December 2nd.
So second.
That was mumbled. What was it again?
December 2nd.
December 2nd, okay. So we'll, remind me again when this committee would be likely voting
On the method?
Yeah.
March, whatever our regional.
Oh, we do it with the budget?
Yeah, it's part of the budget process, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we'll want to have a strong encouragement what method you want us to bring back to you for the budget, so you can see the different, or options of assessment methods. But ultimately, you'll vote in March.
Okay. Are there other questions? Mr. Demling and then Mr. Dennis.
Yeah, so forgive me, some of these are basic questions, but so is this the recommendation of both the consultant and the committee?
This is just the recommendation of the consultant.
Okay. So the committee itself has not expressed a,
They're coming back on the 28th, and we'll know more whether they're going to recommend this or not.
and is that representative, there's representatives of all 4 towns on that?
Yeah, so there's a select board and finance committee person, I think, from each, for the most part, from each town, and they're sharing that information with their full boards.
Okay, so, one more comment and one micro question. So, yeah, I think it was mentioned slightly before, but, you know, emphasizing, when you present this in the future, right? Especially at the 4 towns meetings and such, emphasizing that guiding principle of not wanting one town to be disproportionately affected.
Sure.
I wouldn't bury that lead,
Okay.
like, so late in the presentation. In fact, I might even say that is, throw up some fluffy guiding principles slide before you get into all the hardcore data, because I think it sets up that first pass of, you know, we did this first pass assessment of all these different options, and then we got to these finalists, and then we looked at these lines, and then, you know, people coming from a different perspective, seeing that dotted line more or less in the middle for every town, I think goes a long way, and it's supported by that percent change slide that you have up there. So I think that's a good sort of 1-2 punch. The other thing, and, you know, speak to this as vaguely or detailed as you like, but, you know, someone coming into this that's new, knowing how contentious this has been in the past, I don't really know what the sticking points have been. As someone who is now on the committee now and charged with overseeing the, you know, the budget, the stability and predictability to me is extremely high on my priority list. And so if I'm balancing 2 methods, one that I might technically think is more effective, I would be willing to go with something that is, you know, close enough that is going to have a lot more support among the agreement of the town. So I don't know what kind of background you can give that is productive.
Briefly.
I'll keep it current to what was at the meeting. I think there was sentiment expressed by 3 of the towns of some support for S10, that they liked, you know, they liked it, and so they'd be willing. But I asked them specifically not to approve it, to go back to their boards and get more input and then come back. But they expressed a lot of support. One town, they sort of elected to officially support a method prior to the recommendation, and they picked a different method. They picked S4, and the reasons that they provided, it would save them quite a bit of money in their assessment. I guess I won't hide this. Leverett was the one that did that. And it saves them quite a bit on their assessment, and they like that it didn't require changes to the regional agreement, so it was sort of the easiest transition, possibly the easiest transition, because that's our current method. We wouldn't have to amend the regional agreement. That being said, they did say that since they heard from the other 3 towns, they wanted to go back to their boards and sort of do a deeper, have a deeper discussion around the methods. So that's one reason why we're sort of waiting. No, the group hasn't made a recommendation yet because they're waiting to hear back from everybody.
You're aware, Peter, you're aware of the sort of the core argument that has created a lot of argument over the regional assessment, right? Methodology.
I don't think I could give a senior level thesis on it, no.
No, I mean, I'll give you a you know, Peanuts cartoon version of it, which I think is what I'm capable of doing, but I know it's accurate, is for quite a while we used, and I know there were variations with the statutory method at another point, but as a general principle, we used per pupil spending multiplied by the number of pupils from a given town as the assessment to every town in the district. And that was true for a number of years. Then, when was it? Like late 90s, early 2000s, or somewhere in there?
The first time, or
it was a switch.
The second. Well, we used that till about 2000.
Okay.
And then we switched to the statutory method for 4 or 5 years in the early 2000s. Then we switched to those modified methods you talked about for 4 or 5 years, and then we went back to the enrollment method up through FY 15. And
there's a lot. There has been, generally speaking, a lot of sentiment that method of how many kids are you sending in, we'll charge you by that average, was a fair and reasonable way to do it. As you might imagine, it doesn't take into account the overall wealth of the town or the ability of the town to pay in. And so one town in particular really led the charge in arguing that it was much more equitable and fair to build in the ability to pay. I'll put it that way. It's not actually wealth.
Right.
It's actually ability to pay of a town as a greater factor in the assessments. And because that change creates significant potential or conceptual adverse impacts for the other towns, there's been one hell of an argument about it. And interestingly, as you pointed out in the previous presentation, the statutory method actually already takes into account wealth.
Yep.
In part. It also takes in enrollment very significantly.
Mhm.
And so, once you move to a modified statutory method, you're actually you're tinkering with a foundation that's already taking into account both enrollment and also some element of ability to pay or wealth of a town. You're honest.
So I just wanted to say, I'm glad that to hear that the coalition will be coming back to sort of examine this a little more
Yeah.
closely. The 28th, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think that, again, I appreciate the S10 method, learning more about that and seeing, sort of the recommendations. I will definitely want to hear, I think, more information about where we see some of the shortfalls potentially, and because I think that there might be some really important information there. And I think both to what Mr. Nakajima just said a little while ago about the census, and I had alluded to something similar to that in one of our prior meetings, but I think just understanding any sort of long-term trend that we might see in that method, so that we don't find ourselves back in this sort of situation right now. And of course, you can't predict, the future, and you don't know what's going to happen, and this economy could take a downturn tomorrow, and there could be a million different changes. But just to the extent possible, I think having a little bit more information about what the cons could be for this can help us perhaps in making a final decision.
And it's I didn't highlight it too much. It's a little bit in those charts with the evaluation. You can see where S10 sort of did better and did worse, but we can come back and talk more about that.
One of the, please, Ms. Marion.
So I think you said this, but just to make sure I understand it, it's with these, especially like the top methods here, it's the first year transition. They're going to get these
The big hiccups. Yeah.
right, and after that they seem to settle down, and that's what we could expect in
exactly.
general.
Yeah,
Okay.
whenever you change assessment methods, there's sort of a transition effect where you move to your new level, and then after that, you're sort of building off that level. So it's not a big increase after that. So it's really just that first year where you're going to see a big adjustment in sort of the funding level from that town.
Any other? That's one of the things too, I'd just say, I'm sure everyone is planning on going to the December 2nd meeting. I'm sure I have it on my calendar somewhere, of the four towns, but I'm going to be very candid and very open on camera, publicly. One of the feedback I had gotten after last year was that for a variety of reasons, it's not really anyone's fault, the committee did not visibly take sort of a visible active leadership role in, school committee, I'm saying, in the town meeting. And because there's obviously a nexus between the assessment methodologies, the assessments of the towns, the budgets that are approved, and the budgets that we develop and approve, there's some sentiment that the committee needs to be and also look sort of visibly engaged with this topic, precisely because it's been so politically fraught, but also it goes back to the question of what support we're able to engender for our schools. And I know everyone already says that.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of saying an elephant in the room sort of thing about the four towns meeting, so that you're just aware of that minor buzz that occurred at least last year. I don't know about previous, and we can. And I think part of the fact that this is really important. Part of the reason we've spent a couple meetings on this was because, at least in my analysis coming in last year as a first-class ignoramus, I didn't actually see any way the committee could play a significant role in those conversations other than cheerleading. if we didn't actually have a good base of information and discussion going into that meeting. In which, so anyways, I'll leave it there, but I'll leave it there. This is the Sean Mangano portion of our agenda, by the way. If you all didn't know that already. And we're only halfway through the Sean Mangano portion of our agenda, aren't we? Next on our agenda is fees review. Thank you for everything you're doing, by the way.
Thank you for having me.
This is yet another different style of slide.
This one's more consistent with the first one. So you have a packet. I'm giving you a little bit more information on some of the programs that we've proposed fee increases. So tonight is really just to share with you the fee schedule, our thinking around what fees could look like for next year, get some feedback, and we can talk about it again. So key points to this part of the presentation. So I've been sort of trying to change modes of thinking when it comes to fees. In the past, we've sort of kept fees stagnant until there was sort of an emergency, which happened inevitably every so many years, 3 or 4 years, and then we would increase fees sharply to help cover that, and then they'd stay stagnant, and we'd increase fees sharply, and so it sort of had an uneven, unpredictable feel to it. So what I'm trying to shift to is more small, manageable annual fee increases, and I'll show you what those are. And again, the intent is that the small annual increases are more manageable than a large increase every 3 or 4 years. That's a real big shock. And this will provide a more stable revenue stream to the funds that are supported by the fees. So all these fees support what's called a revolving fund, which is set up for specific programs like athletics, instrument rental, food services, things like that. So this sheet shows all the fees with a little history for the regional schools. So the top one, I'll just go down the list. Top one's college application services. This is when our guidance department at the high school helps provide transcripts when students apply for college. We're not proposing an increase here because the cost to run this program has actually sort of gotten lower over the years as things have become more automated. We actually, in the parentheses there, we created a new thing last year where we made the first 3 applications free because it has gotten less expensive to do this. Parking, you can see we increased $1, 1% from 75 to 76. I'll talk more about that. That's a fee to park at the high school. Musical instrument rentals, when students rent instruments, it's pretty self-explanatory. Again, proposing small increases there. Preschool, the high school operates a full preschool program with a preschool teacher and a para and supplies. And we're proposing modest increases there. Athletics, which you'll get much more at the December 12th meeting. You can see our range of fees. So in the past, we've only shown sort of the full fee. I wanted to, for all of you, so you can see that there's actually several tiers of fees when it comes to athletics. Each tier has a reduced 1 and reduced 2. That's based on the family's selection when they sign up. And so the effective rate that families actually pay, if you look at the total number of kids that participate versus what we bring in, it's much lower than the full fee you see here, quite a bit. And I had that figure. We'll probably share it when we do the more in-depth presentation for athletics. And then the last one is school meal prices, and we're not proposing an increase for school meal prices. We typically try to stay parallel with what the state guidelines are for sort of their minimum price levels, and so it typically requires us to increase it at 25 cents every so many years. But we also typically see a little drop off in revenue when we do increase it, so I'm not going to increase that one if we don't have to. So parking, in front of you, maybe you could switch, I didn't put these in order, but if you go to the high school parking one in that sheet I gave you. So this fund helps support upgrades to the lighting in the parking lot, and in theory, the goal is to actually be able to save up enough here to help repair parts of the parking lot or possibly pave parts of the parking lot. You can see our balance in this fund. The way this sheet works is you have your expenses and revenues at the top, and then down below the ending fund balance. That's how much money is currently in this fund. So you can see we have about 35,000 right now. Our revenues have dropped off a little bit. as of FY15, they really started to drop off. They bounced back up for FY17. 18, I have the budget in there. We expect it to be a little bit better than that because we based that budget on the low 16 year. But again, the point of this is to build up a reserve to hopefully do improvements to the parking lot.
Is this money used for anything on an annual operating basis?
Pretty much just the permits. That's really the only annual thing. So when a kid buys a pass, there's a permit given to put on their car.
So it's literally paying for like a sticker?
In terms of an annual operating expense, yeah. That's pretty much the only fee.
That's low.
Annual.
That's
Yeah. But recently, for example, like we did lighting upgrades to the parking lot, which is.
But that's kind of what I was going to get at.
Yeah.
Is my next point was going to be that then, if not 100%, a very significant proportion of this could in fact be used for.
Yeah, and you can kind of see it in the expenses. If you look at the permits and supplies, it's between $300 and $450 a year. But most recently, we did the lighting upgrade in FY15.
Okay, so I'm sorry if I missed it, but
Sure.
why, the fees collected for revenue, right? The fees collected in fiscal year 17 was, it's almost doubled, right?
Yeah, so it dropped off sharply in 16. There's a couple reasons I think for that. One, enrollment I think trend keeps going down. Two, we had a couple years there where we had different people in charge of that program just through sort of natural staff turnover, and I think that may have had an impact also on sort of the monitoring of our kids getting the permits to park in the parking lot. And then we had more stability in FY17 and it picked back up. So I think FY16 is sort of the anomaly year, and fees are usually between $5,000 and $7,000 a year.
Okay, so basically it was uncollected. Like
It was
you
either
weren't
uncollected or
regulating it.
unrequested, yeah.
Uh-huh.
For that.
And then currently it's at 2,500.
Yeah, so when we built the budget for FY18, we based that on at the time when we were doing the budgets for FY18, the only thing we have to go by is FY16 actuals. So that's why we projected low for FY18, but I believe if I looked at it today, we've actually collected more than that already. So the way this works is it's split into, I think it's split into two. It used to be 3 payments corresponding with the trimesters. I think it's now split into 2, but I'd have to double check. So that's the first one. Musical instruments. So that's the last page. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Just not to break into the next agenda topic, but when we get into the capital plan, you'll see that there's parking items
Yeah.
on the capital plan, and sort of for a future conversation, perhaps 15 minutes from now, perhaps later than that, is what's the intersection between these fees and the work that needs to get done on the parking lot, because that is becoming more imminent.
Well, it's funny, since Ron, Emily, and myself sat in a budget meeting listening to this, that's why I asked about operating, money stuff, funds to operating expenses, is because we had a little conversation about how.
Parking lots. Yep.
Needs to be improved.
So the last page is the band one. The reason it's a little different format is because it's sort of a low-key revolving fund, so we don't put it in the budget book officially. It's sort of just in the summary sheet. But I did want to give you the data on it. So you have your starting fund balance, revenues, expenses, and ending fund balance. So you can see the ending fund balance has come down, mainly due to reduced fee collection related to it. So it's either fewer kids are renting instruments. I have to check in with John Bechtold, who's on sabbatical right now. He's wasn't able to talk to him. But we'd have to look into that closer, see if it's reduced rentals, or what's uncollected, or what's going on. But you can see the fund balance has gone down. And just so everyone knows, when the fund balance, we can't go into a deficit with these funds. So when the fund is out, it's out. And so either the operating budget has to pick it up, like we've seen with athletics or food services, or we have to stop providing that activity.
Mr. Dillon?
So when we go from 2360 in revenue to $450 2 years later, well, we just don't know, like.
Again, I'd have to connect with John about that. It's, again, all this is related to when a kid wants to rent an instrument.
Right.
And the expenses go towards replacing those instruments, doing repairs, and also buying sheet music for the kids to use. And this covers the summer as well. Some kids rent instruments over the summer so they can continue practicing.
It sounds like an interesting conversation to have, and if it has to wait till John gets back, when he gets back. kind of not just about the fund.
Yeah,
But
but the-
also, there might be a story to tell about what's happening in
The activity.
the program, the
Yep.
activity, yeah.
Yeah, it's my interest.
Other on this, or want to keep going?
No, keep. So preschool. That's the back side of the first page. So the preschool is sort of up and down. If you look at the bottom of that summary for the financials, you can see the fund gain or loss. So it's had some good years, some bad years, but the overall fund balance is rather pretty low. And on the sheet behind you, I gave you the rate we currently charge for the high school, preschool relative to some comparisons in the area. So the high school preschool, you can see is at $5.88 per hour. And these are approximate rates from last year. The only one that's lower in the area is Crocker Farm, which is a little bit different type of model, and it has some grant funding to it. So it's a different model that we use in Crocker Farm. But other than that, we're much lower than all the other sort of sustainable programs that are trying to, not make a profit, but keep going year after year. So, and again, this funds a teacher and a para, and then supplies throughout the year. And there is some educational value to this in terms of, for the high school, why it's located at the high school. They still do bring students periodically down to the preschool as a learning experience to work with the kids.
Mr. Gilman?
So the approximate hourly rates, those are the rates that a parent would pay to send their child to preschool?
It's hourly, yeah.
Hourly?
Yeah. But it was based on data I could get from their websites in terms of what their annual fee is.
And maybe Dr. Morris has a better answer for this, but why is that so low, the Crocker Farm preschool rate compared to the other rates? It would seem, even if it is, grant subsidy, that's a pretty strong motivator for parents not to go to the other preschools.
Since it's an Amherst Elementary School question.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I can sort of touch on it briefly, but I also.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that preschool is a different model. It's an integrated preschool, so we actively want to encourage students who are typical learners to be peers for their students with disabilities. So I think in the past there's been some acknowledgement that we actively want to get students, not just for a financial reason, and we don't want that to really influence kind of the peer-based integrated model. So again, it's a longer conversation we could have in Amherst, but in general, when you have integrated preschools, if you look at other communities, the rates are much lower than for private preschools. I think there's great value. I could sing the praises a lot, but because it's a different model, it sort of has a different pricing structure. But I think given the reduction in grants and for integrated preschools, I think it's going to be a worthy conversation to have for the Amherst School Committee.
Ms. Leanne?
What is the average budget a parent pays per month for one of these slots?
Average budget per month.
$500, $400?
Do you have your calculator ready? I think I want to say it's, I would be guessing without doing the math.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure.
I think there's a wide variation in number of days, number of hours that parents send. So, I think and that's not to try to avoid the question, answering the question. It's just when we say what's the typical monthly bill, it really varies from families who send their students for X number of days, for X number of hours, to full-time 5 days a week. And there's really a lot of variation of the populations within that.
Yeah, I think on this, unless we were going to do a deeper dive on the ARHS per se, I would rule this a topic that started to drift off on the regional agenda. Ms. Barron?
Well, I was just kind of curious, how big is the preschool? It's just one teacher?
One
so is it-
classroom. Yeah,
okay.
so typically you try to get about 15 kids.
Okay,
Yep.
and it's open to the public?
Yep.
Okay.
Next.
And then the last one is athletics, which I won't go into too much detail because we're going to get a more better presentation next time. But in general, supports coaches, officials, transportation, event fees, equipment, grounds and maintenance, the athletic trainer. Each of the last 2 years, because the fund has, like I mentioned before, if it runs out of money, the operating budget has to pick it up, or we have to stop doing the activity. The operating budget has had to pick up additional costs from the revolving fund because it ran out of money, and it ranged between $30,000 and $40,000 per year. This supports over 50 teams, both at the middle school and high school, so it's a really robust athletic program, which I'm sure you'll hear next time serves a really high percentage of our students. And I did put on here, 'cause I got the number from them, the average rate that a student would pay ranges from $157 to $176 depending on the season. So if you look at those official rates, this would be sort of the effective rate that students pay based on the different tiers that are available. And that's it.
Other questions, Stanley?
So, like you just said, with the athletic rate, the regular and the
Reduced tiers, yeah.
yeah, those tiers. That's just an option that a parent selects at time of registration. We don't require any sort of.
So districts are not supposed to pull like free and reduced lunch information, not supposed to use that for other programs because it's really supposed to be just the USDA program related to that. So we do let families sort of self-identify whether they are entitled to that. So no, we don't have like a strict sort of, you have to fall into this to register. We typically say if you are, if you are reduced lunch and you want this benefit, then you can select this fee. If not, then here are the other options.
So, you don't have to give me the exact
Sure.
wording, but is it clear on the registration form that this isn't just, would you like to pay at the
Right.
lower rate? It's clearly identified as
Sure.
if you are, I don't know, how is it
I'll have them
described?
bring the form next
Yeah.
time so we can look at it. I think that's probably the cleanest way to do it.
Right.
It's all online now.
Yeah.
Ms. Astor?
Do you know if in surrounding districts are athletic funds usually subsidized by the operating budget, or do they tend to be self-sustaining? Like, are we kind of an
so
anomaly?
I have some data from a while ago. It's usually like 65% operating budget, 35% revolving fund was my recollection from the
Okay.
communities that responded to a survey.
Okay.
We were at about 50-50, so we were a little revolving
Better.
fund heavy in terms of relying on them. The one thing I'd say though is we offer a lot of sports.
Okay.
And if you looked at the offerings of sports with those other programs, I'm sure in most cases we're offering more activities than those other schools are.
Okay.
But you're stating that other districts offer fewer sports and offer a higher level of subsidy
Right. And
from the operating budget.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Because they may offer a higher proportionate level of subsidy in terms of the actual contribution towards the athletic program. It might not be higher.
Not in a dollar figure, but
Right.
in a
Yeah.
proportion.
Yeah.
Okay. Other? Ms. Dominic Cage?
When do we vote on it, or do we vote on it?
So
the increase?
you will vote on the fee increase anytime between now and February. I mean, typically I like to have you vote on it before we bring
Not
the
like
final.
literally now. You mean?
Yeah, one of the
any
next
point
meetings.
before.
Yes. Yeah, not tonight. We like to have it before we bring the final budget because some of the assumptions we'll make on the operating budget are driven by your fees. For example, like if we don't increase the fees for athletics, then we will likely have to increase the operating budget contribution to keep the fund balanced or make additional reductions to the athletic program.
Dominic Cage, you want to comment? I know he wants to talk.
Oh,
Up to you.
I just wanted to get the dollar amount on this sheet right here, about what does that amount to in terms of projected,
Like
revenue?
what's the increase in revenue? Yep.
Yeah, like in dollar amounts.
Yep, I can do that.
What we're talking about,
Sure.
because, I mean, I would like to make sure that folks who are participating in music, even if it's a small amount,
Mhm.
they're renting for a reason.
Right.
They're,
Yep.
they're not gonna buy, you want them to participate, but it's not a major increase, but still.
No, I hear you. Yep.
Dr. Morris?
So tentatively, the fees vote was scheduled for December 12th. That could change, but when we try to map out the next couple meetings, that was the date that was assigned to that vote, potentially.
It's a very specific answer. It's great. Next. Didn't mean to yell. Well, I mean,
Make us up
here
a
in
little
the
bit.
room-
Very
No, but
enthusiastic.
here in the room,
Sorry.
it's empty enough that it's okay, but I'm realizing I also yelled, like, whoever's sitting at home who might be watching, it's like, wake up! We're gonna talk about the capital plan.
They're waiting for the Amherst School Committee to meet.
So the last item I have is capital plan, which we did just meet with the Budget and Finance Subcommittee before, so I'll do similar, slightly condensed version of that. So key points of the capital plan. We use capital planning as a fundamental tool to ensure that our buildings are safe and kept in good working condition. We also use it to keep the communities informed of large capital projects coming up in the future, and to try to balance sort of smaller capital projects effectively over the year, so that there's not sort of one year we get hit with a ton of capital projects because you deferred everything to that year. It's not always an easy process, but that's the intent. We also, another key point is that we do have 2 large capital projects on the horizon, one being the track and one being the middle school roof, are 2 of the bigger ticket projects on the capital plan that are coming up soon. And right now there are no current conversations related to consolidating the middle school and high school after an extensive study in 2016. So we did have a pretty formal process back in 2016, and we did a lot of community input, and there was sort of rough feeling by the community that it was not a great time to do it. Operationally, I think we worked out most of the kinks, but there were still some sticking points. The bell schedule is the one that sticks in my head in terms of how we make the bell schedule work. So, but just that, the only reason I bring that up is because some of the capital items relate to the middle school, and there will be some in the communities that will say, should we make a big investment in the middle school if we're going to be pushing this in the future?
Dr. Morse, I don't know if when we hit the topic that we were discussing a little while ago about enrollment trends and declining enrollment trends, whether that might be an appropriate point. I'd like to get your updated thoughts on this topic. Not to take over that declining enrollment topic, but it relates, and so just as a updated refresher, I would.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. I was thinking the same thing actually as Mr. Mangano was starting the conversation, and I knew this was on the slide. And it will come up at Fort Town meeting, right? I mean, it's a natural topic that continues to come up, so having a kind of, not starting from a paradigm of good idea, bad idea, but actually starting from a paradigm of like, what's the future look like in terms of enrollment? What's the future look like in terms of finances? I mean, I think the retirement piece and staffing is a big one. And then having that frame the conversation instead of a decision point on a consolidation is something that I think would be a healthy way to move forward. That includes that piece, but doesn't make it the kind of linchpin of the discussion.
I'm sorry, could you, that didn't, and maybe it's just the time or something?
Mm-hmm.
That didn't actually clarify anything for me.
Sure.
Are you saying that you welcome the insertion of the topic of consolidating the middle school into the high school within the context of some of the budget, of the enrollment projections you're seeing, and that you foresee that topic becoming active again, not in the long term, but in the near term?
So
I'm using simple English
No,
because
no,
I'm trying to get I'm trying to make sure I understand exactly what you're saying.
No, I appreciate it. So I think naturally when you look at enrollment projections, and enrollment projections are going to show a decline over time, that conversation will come up, but I think what I'd push is that it comes up naturally as part of that conversation instead of the agenda item is consolidation, and then we come up with reasons why we should be studying it.
Right.
I think if it comes up naturally as in, this is the trend, this is a long-term trend of enrollment, that would be the way I'd think about it instead of inserting it into the conversation sort of before we have data that justifies it. Let me be very blunt. I'll be clearer. So sometimes that conversation is, why don't you just convert the middle school, make the middle school and high school go into one building? Right. For me, I don't find that particularly useful because I don't think it's based on data. It's based on, is that a way to solve some fiscal challenge without kind of really thinking forward? So I think as we do more discussion and dialogue on what does the future actually look like with enrollment, I think.
So the point would be, rather than the reverse, you know that this is something people are going to be bringing up and is on their minds, but there is in fact no active plan or consideration to put this, what I'd call outcome, on the table, and that you recognize it's undoubtedly going to be one of many conceptual options that are likely to be debated and discussed in the context of the enrollment trends and facility costs and budgetary pressures, and you're going to deal with it within that context, and also within undoubtedly the context, inserting my own editorial, undoubtedly within the context which would create a framework for discussion in which the best and most optimal learning environment for our children is also being balanced in terms of the educational program and how that affects facilities, along with questions of financial prudence.
I think and I think if it's okay, the only other thing I'd add is one thing that I feel like we learned the last time is we really, if this question gets re-engaged, I think we'd approach it in a way where we'd have someone help us with master planning. I think last time we tried as best we could for a whole host of good reasons to do a lot of the work internally. And I think what we learned is that we're not master planners, right? We have wonderful educators on our staff. And I think we hit a wall at some point and we did get some professional help, but talking to some other districts that at least considered consolidation, including this morning, I was on a conference call, as I mentioned, and there was some districts that have done that. Being very intentional at the beginning of a planning process of what that process is, what professional expertise is needed, and accessing that, which could influence a capital plan item in the future, would be the preference instead of putting really well-intentioned educators in a room to try to solve some issues that are not educational in nature.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, in my final comment on it is just gonna be, it's also not, in my opinion, not setting up a conversation in which there's sort of a box with an outcome on the table,
right.
and then everyone's solving to the box, right? I mean, if you do a good master planning and educational programming conversation in the context of demographic and budgetary pressures, you can also look for other options that might also help satisfy both of those underlying drivers and allow for a community conversation in which stakeholders are not being unintentionally forced to answer the question of yes or no.
Right.
And instead are saying, this is a conundrum, how do we address the conundrum in a way that still ends up with a really positive learning environment for kids? Yes, Zenas.
Just back to the middle school roof again, that started this whole
Yeah.
conversation. I think that, I've also heard the same points made, right, about, potentially regionalizing and combining the schools. But I feel that also one of the meetings, and I think it was actually a four-town meeting that I had attended, where that question had come up, was that the building itself would not be lost to use, right, by the region or by the town. There's going to be some other use for it. So even if that were to be the case, let's say, 10 years from now, suddenly the middle school and the high school are sort of operating in this different building, or there's a different, sort of infrastructure in place for the school itself, we would still want a roof on the middle school. Like, we would still potentially.
I don't know about that. No, I agree. I think
it can be sold, for example. I mean, there's
exactly.
other options available to us.
Yeah.
It's not just locking us into place with a middle school.
What we heard today from some officials, and I think that it's shared by a lot of officials from the four towns, is that we do want to maintain the structure and the systems of the building, because whether it's a middle school or something else in the future, it's going to be worth more if it has a roof, if it's intact. But I still think it's going to come up as we at least have to be ready to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Is it going, Kate?
Sure. This, I just want to take the opportunity for us to, because I didn't see Southeast Campus mentioned in the.
I'll get to it a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But, so let me just finish
Sure.
why I was bringing that up. I think that I'm sorry, it's no longer called Southeast Campus, it's Summit Academy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as we talk about how our district is saving money because we're educating students who would be eligible to go outside, and they're remaining here because we can offer programming. To think about geographically bringing that particular program in-house physically, in the high school, and to get more familiar with, I think it's the 25 or so students that are enrolled in this particular program, and all the staffing and, and all the expenses that are related to having a separate physical building that we would have to maintain, and we just spent money on replacing a boiler. As we think about budget priorities, and if we need to, think creative, think about how do we save money and all those things.
That's a good point. And it has, and some town officials have brought that up as well.
So I apologize, at the beginning of the end of the key points thing, I sidelined you.
It's all right. We got through
Or I
it.
think myself and others sidelined you,
Yeah.
it wasn't just me. Let's roll.
Okay. You actually saw most of this already, so I won't spend too much time on it. These are top section completed projects that, from the capital plan that have already been completed and are done. And the bottom section are approved projects that we're working on now. So we have, as you can see, we have quite a few projects that we have to get completed that are from prior years. So we have a little backlog there. And the reason I say that is because for FY19, we're only proposing one project because we have some work to do to catch up on prior years. So that one project is the track, and we have $500,000 projected for this cost. Right now, we have a consultant. This will be your recreation working group update. The recreation working group got funds from both the region and from the town through the community preservation, I believe, to hire Weston and Sampson to do master planning work and come up with different scenarios and what those scenarios would cost. And they're looking at community field and all the regional fields. So that report's supposed to be done by June. And then there will be some process to get input from the towns as well after the process is complete. But we will have something at the end of June, hopefully, to start looking at what do we think is the best way for the track to be configured? Is it where it currently is, or is it moving it? And so at some point, we'll have that conversation. But this is the money we have budgeted here is for a replacement of the current track, sort of the way it is. If we were going to look at a turf option or something like that, it would be more expensive. And I think at least one of the master plan options we'll look at, if we had like a turf scenario, what would that look like and have an associated cost. So we'll actually get some better cost numbers too when the master plan is done. The current track is 20 years old. Last either renovated or replaced back in 1997. Here are some pictures of the track from a couple of years ago. You can see there's a lot of patchwork there. And some parts where it tears up or strips where we've had to do a lot of patching. So it's definitely at the end of its useful life.
Quick question. The $500,000 includes the master plan?
No, there was a separate capital item voted last year, FY18, was
okay.
$30,000
okay.
for the region share of the capital plan.
Okay.
We probably won't use all that money because the consultant that we hired came in lower than we thought it would be. But that's already been approved.
Would we anticipate the next track to last longer than 20 years? It seems kind of short, is it not?
I don't know. I'm not a track expert. I think that's probably
That's
a long
normal?
time for
Okay.
a track, but it also depends if you do turf or
Sure,
not turf.
okay.
Mike, you are a runner. You might know this.
Yeah, I don't think I think that's a pretty typical
Okay.
length of a track. I think some of it's depending, not to get too much into the weeds on it, just like the one facilities thing, I feel like I'm kind of excited. I know it's late. But, I think when tracks sometimes get ripped up, it depends, how they do it. Do they just sort of repair the track surface, or do they dig in and actually redo, like, quote unquote, the foundation? What's underneath it? My understanding of this one is it was really just the top side.
Yeah.
So the top of the surface was done and not the whole thing. And so some of the problem is that over time, if you do that, some of the same tracks that existed prior.
Right.
It's like
come up
roads.
again.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
yeah,
like
very
roads.
similar.
Yep.
So, but I think it's not wildly off for
Okay.
how long tracks.
But
last.
to be clear, the 500,000, you described it earlier, is
Yeah.
going down to.
Yeah, I think Dr. Morris was referring to the last time it was.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
But yeah, the
I'm just saying in this
500,000
case-
would be if
I
they
mean,
have
if
to
we're
tear up
literally just- yeah.
the foundation as well
Yeah.
or repair it.
Yeah.
So this is the actual capital plan. It's broken into buildings, which is this page, grounds, which is the next page, and then sort of a summary. To the question about Southeast Campus, you'll see here. So Southeast Campus isn't a region-owned building. It's owned by the town of Amherst, as opposed to the middle school and high school, which are owned by the region. But when there is a capital project at Southeast Campus, we work out a cost share agreement with the town of Amherst, since it's their building, but we use the inside of it. We sort of split the cost. So what you see on here for amortization of Southeast Campus renovations, which I'll update to Summit Academy in the next rendition, related to a capital project we did a few years ago. I think it was around roofing and some other internal work. But this is sort of we agreed to a 10-year schedule of paying back the town of Amherst for just a share of the total cost, not the whole thing. And then you can see there's a number of projects in the out years. The roof, you can see we have budgeted at 1.6 million. We have the architects currently working on this. They were doing samples not too long ago. We've kind of told them, we hired architects to do 3 projects, the middle school roof, the Fort River roof, and the Wildwood boiler, trying to get sort of a economy of scale. And we've told them that the boiler is the priority right now, just because urgency around getting that boiler fixed, and that the middle school roof and the Fort River roof are sort of the next step. So we've got this staggered over a couple different years. That could change as well as we get closer. That's FY20, so we're not there yet. We're not voting on that. But just so you're aware, that could change sort of how we phase the middle school roof.
Oh, wow.
This is the grounds. You see the track in there for FY19, 500,000. We talked about parking lots before.
Where is that?
What?
Where is that in here?
The parking lots or the track?
Parking lots.
So if you look at, there's parking and access roads repaving. It's third down on the grounds page.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. So we have some big figures there for various phases of that parking lot. There's quite a bit of surface area there. We can get updated estimates working with the town who does paving all the time to see if these are accurate. But we have it phased in over 3 years. And then there's one at the middle school down below, actually 2. We have the southeast parking lot, which I believe is the one closest to the road for the Parkford district offices. And then below that is sort of the bigger parking lot to the left if you're facing the school. So we do have quite a bit of funds in the capital plan for parking lots, and it was noted actually in our subcommittee meeting, there's a lot of money budgeted for parking lots. And so what I said is these are items that we keep on the capital plan because the parking lots are in some ways in need of some repairs, but we typically push them back. If we go another year and the parking lots haven't worsened dramatically, we push them back a year. But we keep them on there so that we don't forget about them because eventually it's going to come time to replace them. And then, so this is the summary. This is debt. I won't get too into this, but this shows our current debt levels based on the current bond we have out there. And then it projects if we did all the projects on the 16, 17, 18 capital plan, what the new projected debt level would be. And then if you go another cycle out and you do the FY19 through 21 capital plans, what that debt would look like. Our cycle is we usually bond every 3 years, or we bond every 3 years of capital plans. We borrow temporarily while we're doing the projects. Then when they're all complete and we know the exact cost, we'll bond them because you want to get to a certain dollar threshold before you go through the bonding process because it's not cheap. And down below the debt expense section is the actual assessments to the town. So that's what we were talking about with them today is here's what your debt levels would look like that we'd be assessing you if we did all these capital projects and they cost exactly what we think they're going to cost.
And to point it out again, to highlight it, it's projected to go down considerably in FY19, stay roughly stable for 3 years, and then jump fairly substantially in FY22 and stay there for a few years.
Yeah, it goes down substantially really this year. It ticks up a little bit next year. In theory, if we bond for, if we do a bond next year, which is the plan, we would bond 16, 17, 18, which are all approved already. We just have to complete all those projects. So it goes up a little bit for 19, and then, as you said, the big year would be FY22, which would be because of the roof, be as a result of the roof. That would be the expensive project, which would drive that up.
And you had a different slide that you shared with the...
This one.
There you go.
Yeah.
But tax impact.
Yeah, so long story short, the last table, I ran this by David Burgess, the assessor for town Amherst, and he gave me the thumbs up. It's kind of cut off because it's a really long sheet, but essentially what that last table shows is what portion of the average tax bill in each of these towns would reflect the capital plan from the region. So you can't see the towns here, but the top one's Amherst, for example. The average tax bill was $7,300, and of that amount in FY18, $34 would be as a result of the regional capital plan. And you can see how that would go up in the future years. If you go to FY22, when that bump hits up, it would go from $43 up to $93. So it's, again, just to give the town officials sort of scope of the impact on the tax rate, and for us all to understand that as well.
And I was going to say, one of the reasons I appreciate it is the fact that for those people who are following along with the discussion of we need to do this thing, we need to do that thing, this is all really expensive, I just really appreciate the fact that you're doing the work to understand and then convey to us as well as the towns, what does that actually mean for, you know, an
You.
ordinary,
Yeah,
all of us,
all of
right?
you.
So, an ordinary
Yeah.
homeowner, like, what are you
Yeah.
paying, or how does that pass through to rents, for example,
Right.
people are renting?
Yeah.
You know, it's worth, it's good to know.
Yeah, capital's sort of hidden at the back of the budget, but it's a large assessment, and while we think capital is necessary, the town officials do some, balancing of our operating budget assessment and our capital assessment, and they weigh those, and when one goes up, they have limited resources as well, so. So takeaways, large capital projects coming up. We'll drive the debt assessment up if we go through them and approve them. But the plan will address 2 of the highest cost items in the next couple of years if we do that, so that's a good thing. Feedback, questions, concerns, other data you might want? I don't know if I got to the Southeast Campus. Okay.
Yes.
The tax sheet wasn't in here.
Yeah, might not have been.
It wasn't,
It's
it
not
wasn't in the packet.
Okay, I can send that to you as a PDF.
That's why I actually asked about it, I didn't know it was
Yeah.
gonna be in your slide deck.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit, so I think that's why we put it in after, but.
Are you gonna be able to do that for each town, or is that the average?
That was for each town, you just can't see it in here.
Yeah, all 4 of them are.
Yeah, so it has the average tax bill for each town, and then the impact is based on the assessed values from each town, so. Yeah, they're pretty close, each town.
Anything else? Obviously, I'm sure you're open to further questions
Yes.
offline that you could answer in a future meeting.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
That's you, isn't it?
Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening. So just as a reminder for everyone, other than school committee planning, we have 3 additional items on our agenda: charter school expansion letter, superintendent evaluation process, and as a reminder, people who might not have noticed, we did actually get some gifts, so there's some items to approve at the end of the meeting. And also, we do have our little warrant packet flying around for those who are so inclined. Did it go this way already? It did, it went out that way already.
Okay.
Did, you want to introduce the next item?
Sure. So I don't see a copy of the letter in a packet, so.
Neither.
So I'm going to suggest that we strike the possible vote from the agenda item but proceed with the limited discussion.
Great.
Because it'd probably not be a good idea to vote on a like.
That's funny, that's
in
actually
front of
why I
us.
didn't say the word possible vote.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure we talked about that as
Right.
opposed to just.
Conscious of the time, yet the importance of the article, so the brief story, so we were waiting to revise the letter until after the charter school had replied to Department of Ed requesting additional information. They have done that. Dr. Morris emailed us that response. So then I revised the letter. I tried to keep it as short as possible. The structure I came down with was 4 pages with 1 page of references and then 1 page supporting charts for one of the arguments. And there's that. So basically, I hope if you've had a chance to read it, some feedback would be helpful. I got a little bit of feedback, kind of a productive commentary on tone and what tone might be appropriate. I think in this case, it's a good discussion maybe to have for a little bit. In that, on the one hand, this is something we're writing in order to hopefully persuade the commissioner and the Board of Education to a particular action, and yet it's unlike some other public things we might do, and so there's maybe a fine line between a strong tone and an angry tone, and word choice like that. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to hear about. The other sort of timeline issue is that this is all sort of marching towards the deadline to get the commissioner feedback by December 15th, and so. We have opportunity for our committee to do that. One thing I would like to do, though, is to reach out to other school committees. And I'm happy to do that informally myself, just to say, hey, we're working on this, here's this process, here's an example of what we've done. There's some other committees that have acted recently, and share that kind of information. I didn't want to go ahead and do that prior to at least having a discussion here about exactly where we were. So that was one other point I wanted to get some feedback on.
Mr. Menino?
This is a different letter than the one Mike Morris sent to us? Oh, okay.
The concept, and we've talked about so many things that it's easy to lose the thread on this. We've talked about, in addition to Dr. Morris sending a letter as superintendent, that the school committee and even potentially school committees, plurally, if there are others that are interested in taking it up, meaning I'm talking within the family of the Amherst Pelham Regional and, our family, so to speak. Voting on it. Voting on also a letter that would be submitted to the DESI board, Bessie. So, yes, Ms. Hazard.
I don't want to cut you off.
No?
So, Mr. Devling and I did have a little bit of back and forth about this. So he's aware of sort of what I was thinking about. And I want to couch this on my extreme and vast appreciation for all the work that Mr. Devling has done on this. It's just really, really appreciated. And I was a little late in sort of terms of when he asked us to get feedback, but I was working on this yesterday and just really thinking a lot about how, being really careful about how we walk the line around tone and, sort of presuming intentions. That was the piece that was sort of my biggest kind of like, or how do we want to, what is the best way to sort of use data and consider intentions, and as a school committee, sort of what is the face of the school committee, as, this letter is coming from all of us. And so I think I would feel most comfortable if maybe we had a couple of people from the committee sit down with this letter, which has a huge amount of information in it, and really kind of think hard about how it might be crafted to make sure that it's maybe taking a little bit more of a, I'm not quite sure what the tone that is that I'm trying to get at, but maybe more less emotional, more sort of fact. I mean, not that it's not data driven, but sort of working on that piece a little bit. So I just wanted to bring that as sort of where I am in terms of this process.
Yeah, and I've gotten, speaking myself now, I got way late a little bit on a couple things where I wasn't able to look at this as quickly as I would have liked to have. And I would say, I never do this, because someone always starts out first saying, I really appreciate all the work you've done. And so then when I talk, I never repeat that, because I'm thinking, well, of course I appreciate all the work you've done. So it's an enormous effort, but I'm saying that, it's an enormous effort. And actually, I think that there's a lot of good data and facts and sort of narrative construction around that that's actually very positive. What struck me, and I think particularly in contrast to the superintendent's letter, is that tonally, I think I would put it this way: I don't actually think it's even necessary to call out what could be perceived as the motives or intentions of, or even intentions of in this case, that charter school, when there's a fact pattern that's emerging that already can essentially speak for itself in terms of either A, the responsiveness or perceived responsiveness of their revised application to the Bessie board, or B, whether or not anything is factually changed in terms of the underlying facts, essentially, in terms of the enrollment patterns and the programmatic responsiveness to some of those areas. And so, and I think it got particularly, I don't know if we're getting into this, but I guess I'm getting into this. I think it got particularly problematic later on when discussing how one calculates and assesses minority enrollment, in which there was a discussion around what could be perceived as a manipulation of data and methodologies on the part of the charter school that I think stepped a little far in terms of a need to hammer a point home that anyone is intentionally strategizing or being perceived as intentionally strategizing in a way that has a deleterious impact upon the broader population that could be and should be served by our schools. I think, again, the sort of the facts of the matter speak loudly enough that, and then I think it goes tonally to the point that as Hazard is making, that thinking about what it means for the school committee to speak, and then what frankly is even, what's considered persuasive by a third party looking and saying, you're speaking to us, what do you have to say? And to me, in a situation in which you've done such a wonderful, I'm sorry to speaking to you, Mr. Gilman, but you did write it. You did such a wonderful job of organizing a lot of really good information. I think the information actually speaks very loudly, which means it is essentially the proverbial big stick, which then enables the committee to speak, I think, in a somewhat more restrained, but I think very clear way. So I would endorse the idea of potentially taking a crack at working with you to revise it and see if we can come back with a new draft, maybe even on the 28th. Sedonis?
I just want to throw something out there. I mean, I'm thinking we've asked Mr. Demling to go back like twice now to make edits and changes, and I'm wondering if maybe it's a good time to pass the job off to somebody else in the committee so that Mr. Demling isn't the only one, because it is a letter from the committee, right?
Yeah.
And so that way, you know, it's not only one person sort of bearing the burden of having to edit and adapt voices and all of that,
Okay.
but really just, you know.
Okay. Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I totally take to heart the previous comments. You know, so in terms of like, you know, piece of advice for the person who's going to be taking this on is so one of the challenges I found with this is that there's the data, right, of what the back and forth timeline response was with the school and DESE, and then what the enrollment demographic percentages say with the underserved subgroups. There's that piece. Then there's the school's response to that piece, and I found it difficult, clearly, to get it exactly right, where you're not talking about intentions, you're not claiming intentions, and yet you're sort of demonstrating that this isn't just an ordinary problem of two different opinions on the same data. We have, there's other active, you know, those are actions in addition to that going on, and but you know, perhaps one of the examples that made it difficult for me to strike that exact balance was this continual promotion of this idea that RTI is this magical treatment that ought to reduce special ed disability and avoid the stigma of identifying a disability, which is 180 degrees the opposite of how we ought to be doing special ed. And to me, seeing those kinds of references in the press, just it promotes really in my opinion, really harmful mistruths. And so, you know, as that passion is sort of driving my word choice.
Yeah.
I think that's so you know, just something to be mindful of.
No, I think I can. I was thinking about that when I was reading the passage and how one might keep the heart of the point, but also reconstruct a little bit in a way. Honestly, my real opinion on this is, anyways, since you never know what lies in the hearts of men and women, right? I mean, you don't. Who knows? Is that to me? I'd rather judge people on their actions and say what's actually happening. Is anything being proposed that looks like some substantial corrective action that one could see a different trajectory being created? Is there any functional evidence that that's actually, you know what I mean? Like, those things don't require you to assume anything at all about somebody. It's simply saying, look, if you look at the data and you look at what's happening and what's being suggested, you know, there's no revised evidence or position to have that this is going to occur to a better outcome than it was. And I think an example of that, to me, was early in the letter. There was a serial use of the term "accept," that the charter school doesn't accept something that Bessie was saying, and it requires slight reformulation of the sentence. But to me, "accept," when it's used serial like that, is really suggesting, like, I'm sitting with you and I'm dialoguing you, and I don't know why you can't accept my position, right? And it's like, what do I know what you think? I don't know. You know what I mean? You understand, you disagree, whatever. I mean, to me, the relationship between Bessie and their role in authorizing the expansion, I would change in many of those cases the word to comply. That basically they suggested alterations to the application, There's nothing in your response that suggested any compliance or alteration that reflects those changes. Presumably, Bessie would consider that a problem, right? I could leave it frankly between Bessie and the charter school to argue about how many angels fit on the head of a pin, and whether they think they accept the concept or don't, or think they don't. A third-party observer would say, this doesn't reflect in any way what looks to be a compliance with the things they were asked to do.
So, given that I was the one who went after you on this, I'd be willing to work on that draft if there's someone else who might consider.
Given the fact that I've talked endlessly now about my close reading of the draft, I would be willing to do so too.
And I'm presuming that the Amherst School Committee might want to have this in front of them as well. I mean, I'm just saying that that's out there in terms of scheduling
Yeah,
coming up.
okay.
So that could work as well.
So, yeah, so that's totally cool. I don't, by the way, feel like anybody's going after
Okay.
anybody. Like, I obviously come off as, feeling strongly about this issue, but I mean, this is just, you form something with the intent of it being an expression of the full committee, so, where it goes is where it goes.
Got it.
Thank
Thank you.
I mean, I think there's a letter that we all can sign, and I think this is an example of where you can speak on your own behalf about other, how strongly you feel about it.
Right.
When you say this is coming from me as an individual or something, right? I mean, this
Right.
goes to
It's
the aspect of the code of conduct that you were developing. Protocols, right? I mean, when does Mr. Demling get the chance to fully express his and convey his sentiment, which is even stronger than the letter that we're gonna be agreeing upon, let's say? Or maybe even, mention other things that are outside of the letter.
right.
I mean, that's possible, right?
Or it's possible that Phoebe and I will be like so incredibly in tune with you and so awesomely that it'll be like harmonic conversions that will leave with you, Yes,
So that's an awesome question that I don't have a great answer to, but I've thought about a lot in the last 6 to 8 months, not just about this issue, but just about school committee expression in general, and how you split it between what the committee's expression is and the individual on the committee. I don't know how to do that yet, but that's probably a longer discussion than we need.
That's actually sort of the same thing on outreach to other school districts. I mean, I think if, honestly, I'd feel more comfortable if I were reaching out to other school districts, if that outreach is an expression of the objective of the school committee. Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, and what I'm saying is, if as a person who is on the school committee and a citizen activist wants to go out and contact other school committees to do it, I think that's great. I think if it's an expression of the will of the committee, that the committee is reaching out to other school districts, then I would, that's a function of the chair. Unless delegated by the chair. Yes?
I think I generally agree with that principle.
Yeah.
There's probably more atoms to be spliced, just the theme that was Tommy Cage was talking about. But in terms of delegation, then whether you want to take this on, so I did a little bit in order to reach out to the school committees, there's a lot. It's basically you have to copy and paste all the emails from 30 different websites. It's not easy to send it out. So I can send you that spreadsheet and then maybe or you can delegate me to do it, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever the committee's comfortable with. I just want to get it done soon, because most committees have a meeting before the 15th, and that's all they'll have a chance to do.
Right. Sounds good.
So the Massachusetts Association of School Committee has a listserv that goes out to all school committee members, but not everybody signed on to that.
Right.
Which is difficult.
So I'd say two things. One, I am happy to send out an email about this to other school committees generally, through the listserv as well as also through the Excel. I'm not actually saying that to frustrate your ability, Peter, to also continue to, no, I'm very serious, to also reach out to people you're in contact with or you can be in contact with to talk about the background of what we're doing. But I'm sort of differentiating between the official action of the committee in its deliberation over this letter, the process we've taken, and what we're doing next, and encouraging other districts to take a look at it and our willingness to share, versus advocacy, literal advocacy of saying, hey, some Northampton, if you haven't done this yet, you really ought to do it. I'm more than happy for you to be doing that. Yes?
I think I understood you up until the last sentence, so do you want me to send you the spreadsheet of, like,
Yeah,
here's how to
I'm gonna send,
contact
I will
committees?
send
Okay.
out an official communication on behalf of the school committee to other folks. What I was saying, if you had relationships
Right.
or developed them where you knew and you could say, hey Joe or hey Jane or whatever, we're doing this thing and it'd be great if you did it too. It's great. Does that make sense? I think I'm making sense. I believe I am. All right, we'll move on.
So
Yes?
I was just gonna hand, just so people had a paper copy of the letter that I sent out, because if it's helpful, just as people are considering the school committee letter and compare, contrast, and I know that some people got in touch with me about overlap, is that a good thing or a bad thing? So some people prefer a paper copy, so
Okay.
just figured I'd bring it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This one has staples on it. I like that new crimped thing.
I know how Sean does it. He's a different printer than me. So.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Because it saves,
Here on the,
No metal.
Yeah, in the business office.
Yeah.
kind of like good for the environment,
It
right?
is.
So that we're
Much
saving
better,
on staples and
Yeah,
And not hurting people's
staple
hands.
waste and all that kind of stuff.
and it always jams, so stable, so it's another bonus.
So do we, are we talking about the superintendent evaluation process? Or are we deferring this?
Let's defer it.
Yeah, let's defer it.
I'm not feeling well, I gotta leave.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
I would be happy to table that, but maybe if this is going to be something that the subcommittee is going to present, we could just get direction on what we'll be looking for the next time it comes up. Yeah,
I think,
do we know?
yeah, well, I know one thing is when the school committee was looking for some thoughts on how we handle who participates in the evaluation. And we have not yet taken that up at the subcommittee level, as far as
Okay,
reaching out
so
to
let's
see what other
connect.
districts do when new members come on board.
Yes.
It's asynchronous with the evaluation.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
But-
that was an issue.
But I know that was on my list of
Okay.
things for us to.
Okay. And I'm assuming that, I don't think we've talked about it yet. I'm assuming the subcommittee would also take up a near-term schedule for activities that we would engage in with the superintendent to set this year's goals and approve them, right? Wouldn't that be another activity of the subcommittee? Yes.
so, the timeline that we proposed last time was that we would have goals set by the end of November.
Okay.
So I just want to be really clear on what as a subcommittee, our role is in steps between now and our next meeting that will help us move towards that process.
Obviously, this is the broader committee's decision, so I'm going to express my opinion, but that's open to debate and decision. I don't know. Yes, Mr. Ennis.
So I think just as a starting point, we had a set of goals and the rubric and all that stuff that we had gone through before, right? One thing that we were talking about even at the Equity Task Force meeting earlier was how to incorporate some of these sort of diversity goals into the evaluation process. And there's already, I think, a couple of them that are in the existing evaluation that was done this past year, but I think maybe just amplifying those out a little bit more. And so I don't know if that's enough direction, or if you're looking for more at this point.
I mean, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the process of goal development and what that's going to look like. Should Dr. Morris be meeting with our group? I mean, that's more of what I'm trying to
It's funny,
figure out.
I was pausing only because I thought we talked about this last time, and maybe we didn't, but I thought the subcommittee was going to meet with Dr. Morris, actually.
Okay,
and
we
and
did
get-
not,
and
so
get,
we
no, it's
can.
okay. And I thought one of the things we were gonna do is get feedback from Dr. Morris, if he had any, on what he would improve on what we did last time. Because if we're using it as a basis, we want to try to optimize it. I mean, not that, and I think the spirit of the enterprise we had last year was that it's not that it has to be perfect, but it's that we're continually trying to improve it and refine it so that we don't get paralyzed with the idea that it doesn't look perfect or something. And that we'd have that meeting and then a subsequent one possibly where you could even take a first pass at discussing goals between the subcommittee and Dr. Morris, but not too much before it comes back to the committee as a whole.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Probably talked
I'm
about
not
this,
sure.
maybe it's just all in my imagination last time. Dr. Cage.
Is it, would we recommend at this point that the subcommittee be able to, and look at the school equity task force list of recommended, suggested priorities, in this preliminary conversation with the superintendent to, or,
Yes.
yeah.
The answer is yes.
I think so, if that's.
Yeah, I mean,
everyone's
after
good with
this
that.
meeting, I was planning on having us distribute those list of priorities to the committee, the assistant superintendent, and the superintendent anyway. But then logically, some of them call out possible goals, right? So that should be part of the conversation, and part of the dialogue is obviously including your feedback and your response to it, right? And that's part of the dialogue, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Gifts. Ms. McCage.
Do I move?
Actually, there's a motion here, isn't there?
Oh, there's one there, okay. Then from the other gifts.
Do we have to
You
do
you
both?
want me to do this?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I move to accept any toys, clothing, and food gifts made to the ARPS Family Center in support of families in need during the 2017 winter holidays.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising an eye. It carries unanimously. Ms. Cage.
I move to accept David Schneider, check number 1869, a donation of $600 in support of high school orchestra program to repair the piano. Do the whole thing? Also, bespoke, check number 1221 in the amount of $250 for high school student activities. Woodbine Entertainment, the UPS store, check number 13786 in the amount of $250 for high school volleyball jerseys, student activities. Hurley Barrel, for the amount of $30, estimated value of cost, for 2 barrels for Summit Academy to create water system.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? For example, about the barrel system? Seeing none, I guess. We can learn more about that later sometime. Someone Cage?
No, I was ready.
Oh, okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising aye. It carries unanimously. Do I have a further motion? Oh, wait, do we want to forego school committee planning? You can give me feedback within agenda items. I'll take that as a yes. Is there a further motion then?
Move to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
I'm afraid to say I need to take this.